Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is movie of What If Naruto Loved Freya from God of War. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The boy slept. Distant images chased themselves through his mind as he dreamed, blurry scenes of carnage interposed over a scarlet haze. Children wailed. Indistinct figures raced past him, calling for loved ones. Houses splintered like rotten driftwood, sundered by mighty blows. Flames roared high in the night. Everywhere he looked, the world suffered greatly. Men and women valiantly fought against the attacker, a beast that defied creation. Impossibly large and more powerful than anything he could imagine, it slaughtered them with punitive ease. He saw it all, viewing the world through a shroud, watching it the village below burn. Wake up. He had to wake up. He needed to wake up. On some level the boy knew this must be a dream worse, a nightmare, yet he found himself powerless to stir in spite of it, unable to wrest his mind away from the sordid scenes playing out around him. Like an old play that he'd memorized by heart, he knew what would happen, yet he was not its playwright, and thus helpless to do anything but watch everything play out to its inevitable conclusion. He wanted to help them, indeed, his very spirit ached to aid them, but he could not. He was nothing more than a ghost bearing witness, both part of the dream and not, helpless to do anything but watch, to witness, as 4 stone faces shattered and crumbled away into dust. And there, looming over it all, a beast with 9 tails, a fox. It turned, it saw him, its maw parted. Boy, wake up, boy. Harsh words jolted him out of the nightmare with a start. Heck. Tumbling off the pile of furs that served as his bed, the boy crashed to the floor in an ungainly tangle of arms and limbs. A harsh rasping resolved itself in his ears, and it took him several moments to recognize it as his own heavy breathing. Blurry eyes took in his hands, curled white-knuckled against the floor. A pair of boots interposed themselves beside his tan palms. Knowing whom they belonged to, the boy rigidly slew the fear he knew must have manifest on his face and averted his gaze. Are you well? The gruff voice grated against his senses. Fine, father, he muttered, raising his gaze. I'm fine. Just another dream. ... as you say. His father was strength and will personified, a great bearded mountain of a man with skin chalk white, save for a curling crimson tattoo adorning the left side of his body. Like an immutable oak he loomed before him in stoic silence, that pale, flinty visage ever unchanging. By any comparison, the boy felt as though he were little more than a frail sapling. He had a name of course, but his sire always seemed loath to speak it for reasons unbeknownst to him. This man was simply father and he was boy, just as his mother was only mother, and his younger brother, though seldom named, was still his brother. In another life, such a moniker would have annoyed him beyond measure. Now, the boy took solace that he was acknowledged at all. Gathering himself up, he hastily dusted off his fur tunic. Silence towered over them, large and immense. What is it? The boy ventured, pushing a hand through his disheveled hair, still sleepy, yet eager to make himself useful. Are we going hunting? Do you need help with something? Or, your mother has passed. The words were simple and clean, yet a knife twisted in the boy's heart. Oh, she ... has, he managed eloquently, when that unflinching visage hardened somewhat. This morning, while he'd been asleep, she'd passed during his dreams. In disbelief, the boy staggered back a step. He almost didn't want to look. He knew what he would find there. Yet when he saw the wrapped bundle tucked aside near the door, something in him quivered. He knew without a doubt that it was her mother, gone, taken from this world, and he hadn't been there in her final moments. Spirits, he hadn't been there. The thought tied his guts in an ugly knot of despair deep inside him, threatening to damage him beyond repair. Mother, the one person who'd understood him, the one who'd read his name to him, the letter stitched in that blanket, who knew the truth of where he hailed from, who'd promised to tell him all of it, someday. Now she was gone. Soon, she would be little more than ashes. Questions skittered about in his head like restless squirrels, and the boy struggled to master them. Disbelief was the foremost among them. How had she passed so quickly? True, she hadn't been well, but something in him rebelled against it. He didn't want to believe she was gone. She was the one who'd first revealed his name to him, that he had a name in spite of all his doubts, and to have her snatched away so quickly seemed cruel. Even for the gods. He'd loved her with a love so pure that it was almost painful to think of. Mother had been his world, a light so bright that she overshadowed everyone else around her. Everything he'd ever done revolved around her. Her smile, her laughter, her gentle reproach when he made a mistake. Father had been there before her, of course, and while he craved his, but twisted as it might sound, mother had simply been more present. He'd even dreamed of wielding her axe, one day. That the gods would allow her to die, despite all his hoes and prayers ... It almost made him angry. Spit on the gods. A dark voice growled in his ear. They'd do the same of you. The sudden statement almost made the boy blink in surprise. Surely he had imagined that voice just now. Yes, surely. Still, he knew father wouldn't like it if he pried. Even so, he asked, was she ... I in any pain? No. Father turned aside and made for the door. Go, wake your brother. I must gather the wood for the fire. Wait, I can help. The boy pleaded, suddenly afraid to break the news to his sibling. I'm strong, you know I am. Just let me get my boy. As he looked on Kratos' father, he reminded himself stooped low and scooped up mother's wrapped corpse. No doubt he wanted it out of sight while he made his preparations. All the while he kept his back to him. Never once did he look over his shoulder, nor did he provide the comfort he craved. He knew father was a hard man, but even so, was it wrong for him to hold out on a ledge of hope? Instead of, whatever this was, a rare spark of anger flared to life in the boy's chest, but he stubbornly stifled it. He knew father had to be grieving in his own way. It must be. The alternative was unacceptable. So, once again, he tamped down that brief flicker of irritation and mastered his rage. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, the boy nodded and did as he was bade. "Yes, sir." A muffled grunt was father's sole assent, then he shouldered the door aside and vanished. The boy grit his teeth and sighed. Figures. Why did I expect anything different? Theirs was a small home. It only took a few quick strides to reach the small cot that housed his sibling. Somehow, he'd managed to sleep through it all, his nightmare, father's shouting. Everything. He almost envied him for that. Anyone who could sleep through such a ruckus was blessed by the gods indeed. Though he was 2 summers younger than him, his sibling had a gift for language and the bow ... and sleeping like the dead. Even now he could hear him snoring softly against the wall. It almost brought a smile to his face. While he bore wild ice-blue eyes, whiskered cheeks and unruly hair the color of spun gold, Atreus took after their mother with his dark hair and pale appearance. While he remained hale and hearty, by contrast Atreus was often frail and sickly. He'd only recently recovered enough strength to venture outside. Likely because he'd been born of her. Unlike ... Ruthlessly, the boy slaughtered that rebellious thought before it could take root. He wasn't to blame in this. No one was at fault, no matter how much he might wish it were so. Mother had been such an integral part of both their lives, and now that life had ended, he refused to allow his grief to get the better of him. There would be plenty of that soon enough when mother was laid to rest. Atreus wouldn't take the news well. A scarred hand fell, shaking his shoulder. "Time to wake up and face the world, little brother," he muttered softly. "Rise and shine." A muffled groan greeted him. "Just a few ... more minutes." "Sorry, not this time." At first Atreus resisted him, half-heartedly batting his hand away with hands heavy from sleep, but the older boy persisted. Persistence was the key in all things where his little brother was concerned. So long as he didn't give up, he knew he'd wake up eventually ... even if it made him a little cross. He'd forgive him for the rude awakening sooner or later, just as he did when sibling rivalry inevitably reared its ugly head between them. Of course they'd fuss and fight, even come to blows at times. They were siblings. In the end, they always forgave one another. It was never a matter of if, only when. They were brothers after all. NeonZangetsu. Morning already. The boy grunted quietly. Need a hand. Dark eyes fluttered open under his relentless rousing at last. Fine. Taking his arm, Atreus hoisted himself upright. Eyes bleary from sleep blinked slowly, not yet aware of the tragedy that had befallen them. For a fleeting moment, the boy almost wished he'd disobeyed father and left the house after all. Anything was preferable to this. Seeing the light in the eyes of his kin and knowing his next words would snuff it out. Perhaps forever. Atreus had loved their mother deeply, deeper even than him. What was about to transpire might break him, shatter him so utterly that he'd never come together again. Yet he had to tell him. To keep this from him was not only impossible, but his brother would resent him for it. Perhaps even despise him. To tell him the truth. This was his duty as eldest. His responsibility. Where's mother? A lump lodged in his throat. Atreus glanced about their home, noting the absence of their parents and the silence that came with it. A heavy pall draped itself between the two siblings, opposite as night and day. Even so the elder held his tongue, waiting for the younger to come around, wanting to spare him the pain as long as he could. Finally, he knew he could wait no longer. The words pounded at him, ready to burst forth from his lips at the slightest provocation, in spite of his best efforts to hold them back. Taking his brother by the shoulders, he steeled himself. She's not here. When Atreus finally spoke, he scarcely heard him. She's gone, isn't she? The boy nodded. You can cry if you want. I won't tell father. His words trailed off into a mild grunt as the boy's head abruptly slammed against his chest. The sudden burst of strength had startled him, but he made no mention of it. He simply sat rigid atop the pile of furs, a shoulder to cry on. Small hands fisted against his tunic, gripping fiercely against them until their knuckles went white. He felt his brother's pain in that instant, as keenly as if it were his own. There was confusion, of course, dismay and anger, but also sorrow. So much so that he nearly drowned in it. He didn't trust himself to anything but sit there, one arm curled awkwardly around his sibling's shoulder. Why her, Naruto? He croaked. Why did she have to die? It's not fair. The use of his name, so rarely spoken, startled him. A lone tear rolled down his whiskered cheek. I know, he sighed. He didn't speak. He only held Atreus. Family was family after all. In the end, family was all you had. Perhaps, had he known the chain reaction mother's death would cause, he would have wept too. Not just for her, but for what was soon to come. A catastrophic series of events, all triggered by one death. one that would lead to more, many more. It would bring about the very end of the world as they knew it, not just for this realm, but many more. One would have everything ripped away from him, yet gain so much more for his loss. The other would be cursed by both gods and men alike, forsaken in the eyes of many, yet also blessed by others as he tore one order down and built another in its place. Together, they would lay waste to the very heavens themselves. They would suffer, they would sacrifice, and in the end, one would pay a terrible price. All this, from this single, solitary moment. But how could they have known? They were only boys, after all. This is their journey. Fire. Even as a child, Naruto had never been afraid of the flames. On the contrary, the gentle warmth of the hearth both beckoned and compelled him as a boy. It had always called to him, protected him, shielded him. His earliest memories were of fire, watching the world burn around him as he was carried away in pale arms. Heat seldom harmed him. One might say that he was immune to it. Call it a blessing or a curse, it was simply the truth. Even now, with his good arm thrust into the roaring flames of the pyre, the boy felt nothing. No, wait, he lied. He did feel something in the flames, a dull warmth of sorts, little more than a faint tingling in his right hand. It registered it as little more than dull warmth, rather than the searing burns he should have suffered. Yet for all his resistance to the flame, he could no sooner hold it than he could her ashes. His scarred fingers curled into a fist around warm, empty air. And still the fire raged on, consuming both wood and flesh alike, leaving him unharmed. The fire didn't bother him. It was the cold that concerned him. With her death, something had withered in him. He rarely felt the chill, but he did so now as he watched Mother burn on the pyre. Tongues of flame crept up across her shrouded body, slowly consuming her as surely as the illness that had taken her. In this instant he'd never felt so alone in his life. Father had taken Atreus out on a hunt, but he had chosen to stay behind and watch her body burn. Perhaps it was petty of him to linger so, but linger he did. His little brother had a good heart to be sure, but he'd never killed before and sorely needed the practice. He knew his sibling craved their sire's praise just as much as he. Alas, he had yet to realize how impossible that was. Why did it have to be you? He muttered, gazing into the flames. Why couldn't it be him? It's not fair. The fire held no answers for him. Though he liked it not, someone had to tend to Faye's ashes, make certain they weren't scattered by a strong wind. Or so he told himself. As the embers that fed on her fading form drifted upwards and vanished, he regretted his decisions. Cursed the world for its cruelty. Their mother was gone, left to drift away into nothing more than bittersweet memories. He felt numb, lost, unsure. Fingers clenched into fists at his side. Anger reared its ugly head. How he longed to have someone to curse, someone to lash out at. Damn the gods. Why his mother? Why did she have to die? At the thought, his anger came to a boil. Gods did nothing but take. Yet they were worthy of praise and being revered. Bah, it was nothing but arrogance and self-entitlement. If gods were really so meant to be admired, looked up to, and held in awe and admiration, then what had they ever done to earn it? Sure, it was said that they had created the world, but with all that was wrong with it, that meant the world's problems were due to the failure of the gods. And if they truly were as benevolent as some claimed, why had they allowed Mother to die? If this is what the Aesir allow, why worship them? They're no gods. The sheer thought of the loss of his mother, the hardness of the man he was raised by, and the fact that it happened, it roused something within a dark place inside of him, beckoning him closer with whispered oaths that he would never need feel this way again. And just as he stepped closer to it, if you continue down this path, you will lose much. The boy's head jerked up and blue eyes widened. Standing there at the pyre, a peerless beauty sheathed in a crimson cloak awaited him. Her scarlet hair, held back by a shawl, matched only by her ruby eyes. She seemed to embody the flame, the hearth itself, as though she were forged from the burning depths of Muspelheim, the realm of fire which was the domain of Surtur and the fire giants. And yet, the warmth she gave off, the heat that came from her had a quality of gentleness to it. For all her beauty, it was the shine of humility and modesty that was the source of that peerless majesty. What the hell, woman? Where did you come from? Greetings. She inclined her head in spite of his shock. I am. Great. Mind's playing tricks on me, he muttered, cutting her off with a wave. What are you, a hallucination? The woman sighed at his put-out remark, but rather than argue, she merely shook her head. Your heart mourns, she murmured, the words nearly lost in the roaring inferno of the pyre. Nothing seems real to you now, numbed as you are with loss. His eyes never left her as she drifted around him, inspecting the roaring flames with a passing glance. Small wonder why you dismissed me out of hand. When her words drew a growl from the blonde, she turned back to him, hands raised in surrender. Peace, I merely state what I see. A muscle jumped in the young man's jaw. And what do you see? He scoffed, turning away. You're no Aesir. If you are, you have awful timing. For the first time since they'd met, the woman's eyes lost their gentle lava glow. I do not associate with Odin and his brutes. Oh, well, then. Realizing he wouldn't be rid of this apparition so easily, Naruto finally relented. Turning to face the newcomer fully, he leashed his anger and composed his face into a stoic mask. If his mind was truly playing tricks on him, the least he could do was hear it out. The idea of conversing with someone, even a potential figment of his imagination, was infinitely appealing to drowning in his own sorrows. Maybe Mother's death had driven him mad. Perhaps this was simply the beginning of a downward spiral he'd never recover from. Somehow, he couldn't bring himself to care. What did you mean? If I continue down this path, I will lose much. The cloaked woman held her tongue. Well, out with it. Trust must be earned and maintained, young one, and I have yet to earn yours. She hesitated a moment longer beneath his icy gaze, perhaps choosing her words with care, before she finally spoke again. Perhaps I wish to spare you pain. Perhaps I know what it is like to lose one's family to rage, sadness, and misery. Anger still lingered on his lips. And why would it matter to a phantom if I did? If not for your own sake, then that of those that depend on you. The woman in the flames replied, her eyes narrowing with a hint of reproach. We both know this is true, do we not? That is reason enough. Bitter blue eyes widened at her sharp remark, only to narrow at the biting truth within. Atreus, illusion or not, this woman's words held a kernel of truth. He did have someone to look out for, someone to set an example to. As an elder sibling to Atreus, he couldn't afford to let his own despair consume him and turn him into something else, no matter how much that rage might dampen his own feelings of loss. However easy it might be to give in to grief and let those feelings drive him. He must be better. No, they must be better. Exhaling softly, the boy breathed out, and his anger went with it. Thank you, I think needed to hear that. The burning woman smiled. That is good to hear. You have reasons you can't afford to lose yourself. Like he did. The man you call father is a hard one, yet not without reason. His story is one I will not speak of, save for that he knows how pitiless the divine are, how they do nothing but take and demand and take. And what it means to finally say enough. He rose a brow, and what makes you so sure about that? It is not my place to say. As he looked on, burning woman sighed, sagging as if a sudden weight had been thrust upon her slim shoulders. Indeed, her bright eyes almost seemed to grow dim as he looked on, haunted, reflecting untold depths of despair, loss, and sorrow. Whomever she was, her spirit bore a deep wound, infinitely deeper than his own. She'd lost more than family. The way she spoke made it sound as if she'd lost her world, nay, her very reason for existing. The boy wasn't sure what caused him to draw this conclusion, only that he did. Painful memories, eh? He asked, earning a nod in reply. Who are you, then? Illusion in the flames or not, I need to call you ... Well, something. Great, he was taking pity on an illusion now. What the hell was wrong with him? The woman looked up and nodded her thanks to him. A touch of amusement flitted across her face. I believe you called me woman, earlier. The boy sighed. Yeah, that was my old man talking. He muttered aside at the flames, you startled me, remember. Her expression turned pensive, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't reply. It came as something of a shock when she did. Very well. My name is Hest. Even as she spoke, the words withered on her lips. She looked past him, her eyes widening in mindless terror. Whatever she beheld behind him must have truly startled her, for it caused her to retreat without a word. As he looked on, she vanished into the smoke and heat of the pyre. The naked fear in her eyes startled Naruto, but when he turned to face it, he found only father and Atreus approaching from a different path. One leading from behind the house, not the one they'd taken into the forest. Much to his chagrin, the former proved as unreadable as ever, but he was alarmed to see his brother's expression. Atreus looked almost sullen. You're back. He blinked, startled. When did you? You are in your head again, boy. A crushing weight of disappointment nearly stifled his response outright, but the boy somehow pushed through it. Sorry, sir, he muttered. But at least the fire. What fire? Turning his gaze back to the flames, Naruto found only cold ashes, long since cooled by time and the elements. Not a hint of flame remained. Impossible. Just how long had they been conversing? Had all that truly been in his head? He almost considered telling him what he'd just witnessed, but a thorn of doubt pricked at his conscience and held him back. Father already knew about the dreams, but if he learned he was seeing things during his waking hours, then he might lose faith in him. Worse, he might deem him unready for the journey ahead. Atreus, in his boundless enthusiasm, saved him from this. We killed a troll. Naruto's right eye twitched. Is that so, little brother? He chuckled, mussing his sibling's hair. All by yourself. Atreus colored. Well, it was father mostly, but I helped. I shot it in the eye. Despite himself, the boy's lip quirked. Oh, I see. Brother, that's a terrible joke. Kratos merely grunted. He shot well. But his anger got the better of him. Even then, Naruto found himself reluctant to ask. Did you bring me back a trophy? Much to his surprise, Kratos dipped a pale hand into his satchel and lobbed a small piece of broken horn in his direction. With a baffled grin, the blonde laughed and deftly snatched it out of the air. Tucking his newfound prize away into one of the many pouches on his personage, he beamed and secured it firmly in its new home. Rare instances like these almost warmed his heart. Almost. He'd asked more out of reflex than anything else, really. Even so, father sometimes surprised him with small acts of kindness such as these. Atreus tilted his head. Brother ... You're kinda scary sometimes. What do you do with all those trophies anyway? Naruto shook his head. It's a secret. He paused then, noting his brother's taut expression. Why the long face? The joy in those bright eyes dimmed somewhat. Father says I'm not ready. And you are not, Atreus. Kratos rebuked him with a harsh glance. Go inside. I must speak with your brother. Alone. Father, there's no need to. No, he growled. The younger boy flinched. But, now, A moment's hesitation passed between the three of them, and for a fleeting instant the boy wondered if his brother would obey. Naruto offered a helpless shrug and gave Atreus' shoulder a comforting squeeze, pressing his own knife into the boy's hand. Pacified by this brief show of brotherly affection, the young archer reluctantly stomped a foot into the snow and retreated toward the homestead. Kratos didn't spare his second so much as a passing glance. Instead, he took a bag from his belt and began to gather Mother's ashes into the worn pouch. Once more, silence fell over father and son. None disturbed her ashes. Naruto shook his head. "No, sir. You have kept up your training, then?" He paused, briefly looking up from his task. "The spear and shield." Naruto nodded quietly. "Yes." A satisfied grunt greeted him. "Good." His father rumbled. "You will need them on the journey ahead. So we're doing it. Taking her ashes to the mountain." Kratos merely grunted in affirmation. Silence draped itself over them like a wet blanket after that, a pall broken only by the sound of Faye's remains being relentlessly scraped down into the bag. Even he could see that father was fumbling, trying to find words. The boy didn't mind. He knew Kratos was a man of few words. That didn't excuse his blunt actions. So often he spoke before considering the weight of his words. Not out of spite or anger, it was simply the way he was. Father was a harsh man, forged by his past, a past neither he nor Atreus knew. Perhaps they never would. Mother had always been the soft one, the kind one, and they had been content with that. Yet now that she was gone, each found themselves trying to understand a man neither knew. Mother had always understood him better than they ever could. How did you move on from that? It was experience that prevented Naruto's heart from hardening against Kratos entirely. He at least had some measure of the man he called father through the years. But Atreus lacked that experience. If things continued as they were, one of them would break, or worse. You shouldn't alienate Atreus, father. He is not ready. This time, the pale warrior did not glance up from his task. Your words will not change this. And I am, then. His voice rose in protest. You know about my problem. Father, we can't leave him here alone. He'll hate you for it. I won't. Mother wouldn't want that. My decision is final. Mother would have understood. He muttered. She would have let him go. That tattooed visage turned. What was that? I said Mother would have understood. With that his temper finally slipped its leash and he rounded on the man he called father, eyes stinging. But you don't. You never understand. He gave him a hard shove, but only succeeded in stumbling backwards. Don't you see? Crimson eyes glared up at the towering mountain of a man. You're being too hard on him. Do you even care? You don't, do you? Did you even love? Boy, he regretted the words the moment they left his tongue. In an instant father loomed over him, close enough to touch. Those dark eyes burned, seemingly lit within by the sheer force of his wrath. Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief, child. He thundered at him, the sound like a giant boulder's grinding down the mountainside. The road ahead is long and difficult. One of us must remain focused if we are to survive. Refusing to be cowed, the boy thrust his forehead against that of his father. What's the point in surviving if we're at each other's throats? As quickly as it had come, the spark of anger withered. With an ancient sigh, Kratos leaned back. Mourn how you wish. There, at last, a rare note of pain broke through his seemingly impenetrable facade. Leave me to my own. Naruto shrank back half a step. I didn't realize. No, how could you? Kratos exhaled, sounding old beyond his years. You do not know my ways. While he'd spoke, father had finally finished his task. Piling the last of Faye's ashes into the bag, he cinched it shut with a simple leather cord. As his son looked on, he bound it to his waist with a thick rope. Only once he'd completed this objective did he stand, rising to his full, towering height over him. Naruto fought down a flinch. He knew father wasn't trying to intimidate him, this was simply his neutral state of being. Those flinty eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in rare concern, and he knew at once that he'd been had. After their brief spat, he found himself almost unwilling to continue. But something had awoken within him, something that would not be denied. Something else troubles you, boy. What is it? The words burst out of him all at once. I know I'm not your son. Kratos went eerily rigid, his body stiff as stone. Boy, you will watch your tone. Still, he bowled on ahead, heedless of the danger. But I'm not, he muttered, kicking a bit of burnt wood back into the pyre. Not really. Blue eyes found his, blank and glassy. I'm not your blood, not like Atreus. He jerked his head toward his brother further down the trail, watching him slam the door to their home behind him with a harsh crash. You might have found me first, but after you had him, you only kept me out of pity. That's okay. I don't mind being the second fiddle. It's just, now that Mother's gone, you can't treat him like that. You'll lose him. You. Strong arms took him by his shoulders. The sudden act of kindness jolted him upright. You are my son, as is your brother. Nothing can change that. Naruto chewed quietly on his lip. Did you love Mother? Yes. Kratos admitted after a long painful moment. More than life itself. Well, isn't this touching? Father and son turned as one, startled by the sudden intrusion. Rather, the intruder. The soft sound of clapping drew their attention. I'd hate to interrupt this touching moment, but... No. He laughed, shaking his head. Actually, no. I'd love to. He cut an imposing figure, naked from the waist up, most of his upper torso sheathed in flowing azure tattoos. Yet for all his menacing appearance, despite his wild hair and scruffy beard, it was the eyes that truly frightened the boy. They were dead, vacant, yet brimming with madness, as though they'd been deprived of all sensation, leaving behind a hollow husk of a man. Something deep within him gibbered softly at the sight of that wild gaze. It was the expression of man who'd gone numb to the world, a soul who had lost everything, one who indulged in every carnal pleasure he could find, yet found no satisfaction in this. And now he came for them. Kratos stood slowly, placing himself between him and those horrid eyes. "Get in the house, boy," he rumbled. Naruto growled at the words. "What? No, I can hell. Do as I say. Don't run away, now." The man's rough voice reverberated through the clearing as he approached, harsh and biting. "It's no use hiding anymore. I know who you are. What's going on?" Naruto hissed under his breath. "Do you know him? More importantly, I know what you are." The stranger sneered. Before the boy could think to do as he'd been bade, the stranger abruptly reached them. A few swift strides devoured the distance between them. Rather than attack, however, he paused before Kratos. A strange, almost morbid fascination dawned in those dead eyes, as if he'd been searching for this one moment all his life, and having finally found it, didn't know what to do with it. Then that mad gaze found him and a different emotion blazed there, sending his stomach turning until father yet again barred his path. Naruto expected the newcomer to erupt then, to fly into a fit of fury. Quite the opposite. A hand thrust itself between them. If anything, this intervention seemed to delight the stranger. He mused, sizing the pale warrior up. "Thought you'd be bigger, but you're definitely the one. Long way from home, aren't you?" Kratos bristled. "What do you want?" The stranger grinned and edged forward. "Oh, you already know the answer to that." Sneering, the man leaned around him to leer at Naruto. "What's wrong, boy? Going to let daddy do all the fighting for you?" A spark of anger flickered to life in Naruto's chest, demanding recompense. "Whatever you seek, we do not have it." Refusing to be riled, Kratos turned away from the stranger, edging his son toward the door. "You should move on." Hoarse laughter greeted him the moment he turned his back. "And here I thought your kind was supposed to be so enlightened." He raised his arms, voice lilting, mocking him. "So much better than us, so much smarter. Yet you hide out here in the woods like a coward." Naruto felt rather than saw father exhale, a short, sharp breath of anger leaving his body. He knew this was his opportunity to retreat, to dart inside and slam the door shut behind him. Yet despite that he couldn't bring himself to move. When the door hesitantly creaked open, he immediately slapped a fist against it and hissed a low command to stay put, preventing Atreus from unwittingly wandering into the fight. Too late. He knew at once that he'd been seen, worse, that the newcomer had seen him do it. Impossibly, the stranger's grin grew. "Who was that?" "No one." The stranger's grin widened still further as the Spartan faced him at last. Kratos growled, deep and low in his throat. "You do not want this fight." The stranger sneered. "Pretty sure I do." An open palm slap cracked across his face, jerking father's bearded visage to the side. He did not retaliate. Instead, he accepted the blow stolidly, weathered the man's contempt like a stone against the ocean. A twitch of his muscled neck brought him about to face the tattooed invader once more, but this time Naruto caught the telltale glimmer of anger lurking behind those eyes. This time, when the stranger stepped forward, Kratos immediately moved to meet him, glowering down at the shorter man with the controlled fury of 1,000 warriors. "Leave my home." A wide sneer greeted him. "You are going to have to kill me for that to happen." Clenched knuckles barreled into his face again, and once more, Kratos didn't budge. A fist slammed home into his scarred stomach, and still, he remained rooted where he stood. Irritated by his refusal to fight, the stranger snarled and struck him once more in the face, then reeled in his arm to do so again. On the fourth, he wasn't so fortunate. "I warned you." A pale palm shot out and caught his fist in mid-swing, drawing a startled grunt. Eyes ablaze, Kratos twisted the stranger's arm backwards in a vicious vice, bending him over himself where he stood. With one final reluctant glance over his shoulder, he reared a wrapped arm back to strike. The stranger simply laughed. Finally, in a wordless roar, his fist rammed home against the stranger's face with a sickening crunch, flinging him head over heels into the snow. Blood burst, cartilage cracked, bones broke. Impossibly, the stranger's short-lived flight didn't last long. Laughing, he flopped onto his hands and knees, shaking his head in disbelief. Kratos paused, lowering his still outstretched arm. A glimmer of confusion flitted across his pale face. Naruto felt inclined to agree, given what he'd just witnessed. He'd seen his father shatter stone with a single blow. How in hell was this man still conscious? Then that gaze settled upon him. "Boy, stay out of this." Yes, sir. With startling speed, his sire crossed the sundered snow to the strange and snatched him up by the arm. Heedless of his morose muttering, he hoisted the man up. Staggering like a drunkard, the tattooed stranger offered little resistance. If anything, he seemed disoriented by the blow. An ember of pride flickered in Naruto's chest. He hadn't a clue of who this madman might be, but clearly he'd bitten off more than he could chew. Served him right for picking a fight. Grunting, Kratos pulled the swaying stranger upright. As they looked on, the man sighed. "Fine, my turn." Without warning, the stranger struck like a coiled viper, eeling out of Kratos' grasp and lashing out with a blinding uppercut. This blow exceeded all others, colliding solidly with Kratos' chest to launch him into the air. His spinning body clipped part of the roof as he soared past. Like a bird taking flight, he rocked past, tumbling into the air. He seemed to hang there for what felt like an eternity, spinning end over end as he rended through their roof. Then gravity sank its cruel claws into him and he finally fell, plummeting to the ground with a harsh crash. Father, laughing, the stranger turned his gaze on him. How incredibly disappointing that was. Rather, the door he protected. Who's in the house? The boy stood his ground. None of your damn business. Irked, he glowered at him for a long moment. Slowly, that bearded visage twisted into a murderous scowl. He paid no heed to his lowered head, those twitching fingers, nor the senseless gibberish escaping his gaze. He felt only crushing disappointment. He hadn't felt a thing, not even a tingle. The old man would be up soon enough and needed to be dealt with, but for some reason the boy's response aggravated him, perhaps because he had been the same once, protecting others at the cost of himself. Idiot boy. He'd snuff him out right here and now for that attitude. Your turn then. A fist cocked back. Red eyes snapped up. I'm gonna kill you. In an impossible movement, he flowed around the blow. Then he struck. Truck. Much to Balder's disbelief, the blonde dashed forward and drove his fist deep into his gut, leaving him over and retching. Enraged by the sudden surge of energy, he drove a roundhouse of his own into the boy's face. Unfortunately, in his anger, he failed to realize his opponent was being driven by something far more potent than rage. He glimpsed the crimson cloak sheathing the boy's body, a sickly red aura in the shape of a man, and thought nothing of it. That would prove his undoing. BLAM. An uppercut caught the deranged deity's jaw with full force, snapping his head back. Crunch. Even as he spun to meet him, the young blonde's thrust kick smashed into his face with sound and aplomb, bending bone and crushing capillaries. Reeling, the god lurched, a strangled snarl fleeing from his lips. The acrid taste of blood flooded his mouth, a salty coppery sensation he hadn't experienced since. Wait, I felt that. In disbelief, he started, surprised by the sudden spurt of sensation. I actually felt that. A joyous laugh burst out of him, peaking in delight. I can taste this, the blood in my mouth. Everything else was still achingly numb, but to his great delight, he found he could taste again. As if a switch had been flicked somewhere deep inside him, part of the spell that bound him peeled away by whatever wretched energies that consumed the boy. Clambering to his feet, he cast the boy a rueful glance, his curiosity sweet euphoria. Piqued at long last. You, what did you do? He never received an answer. Well, not a coherent one, at any rate. A clawed fist closed around his face and quite suddenly, he found himself flying. Wood and timber splintered before his back as he crashed through the roof and into the backward, cast through the very same passage he'd flung Kratos. Groaning, the battered deity struggled upright, seeking his opponent. Instead he found only the Spartan, staring at him in disbelief. But not for long. A crimson comet fell out of the sky and slammed into his chest from on high, sundering the earth and sky alike in its haste to reach him. This time, Balder embraced the pain when it came and happily gave himself to the battle as twin fists crashed down on his head. Naruto saw and felt none of it as he rained down blow after blow upon his most hated enemy. There was only one thought, one pure objective, one wild reason. One blow. Do not. 2 blows. Touch my. 3 blows. Father. The boy had lost himself to his anger. Kratos could see it in his every movement, every blow that hammered down on the stranger who'd come to their home. He saw it, knew it, read it in those burning red eyes, and a part of him recoiled at the sight. Not out of fear, but recognition. This went well beyond mere anger. This was rage, wrath personified, emotions tamped down for years upon years, all released in one single cataclysmic burst of pure primal passion. A roaring flame of righteous indignation that few could douse, much less temper or control. His fists crunched down against the tattooed man's visage relentlessly. Do not touch my father. No, far worse than that. He saw himself. Boy, if the enraged youth heard his shout, he did little to show it. Seizing his prey by face, he flung Baldur over the house and leaped after him, howling all the while. Now was not the time for inaction. Forcing his aging body upright, the weathered Spartan summoned the Leviathan axe back to his hand. Though its own was already plodding forward, the treasured weapon followed its new master and landed in his outstretched palm with a satisfying smack. A fresh surge of adrenaline roared through him and within moments he found himself sprinting, running headlong toward the fresh sounds of combat. Atreus had yet to emerge from their battered cottage, and with a bellow to hide under the floorboards the ghost of Sparta threw himself back into the brawl. He knew well what spurred the boy onward. He'd seen it once before in his misspent youth. Powerful though the boy in this fresh surge of rage might be, it had its limits. Limits that could be exploited. Where's that temper, boy? Come on, make me feel something. Bastard, let me go. I'll gut you. Manic laughter greeted the boy's furious declaration. Sure enough, he came upon them just as the stranger got the better of him. Though the boy bucked and fought back with near reckless abandon, his own drive found itself matched in the face of the stranger's seemingly endlessly vitality. No content to meekly allow himself to be pummeled, the tattooed man had somehow managed to pin the boy against the ground and trap one of his arms behind his back while planting a boot against his skull. Like a feral beast the blonde struggled against his unshakable grip, that eerie restless red aura still writhing and twining against his shoulders. The sight stirred something in Kratos. Those wild eyes cut towards him then, gleaming with a shade of madness. Ugh, nice of you to join us, old man. Feel like talking now. A red haze draped itself across the Spartan's vision. You will release him and leave this place." The man merely sneered. "And if I don't?" With a low growl, the ashen Spartan hefted his axe, only to watch that booted foot crush against his son's skull. The sight stilled him more than any blow ever could. With that kind of strength, a simple flick of his ankle would more than suffice. The merest twitch and Naruto would die, all before he could ever hope to reach him. Even if he launched the axe at him, the stranger would still have more than enough time to do the deed. A finger wagged. "One more step and the boy dies." Kratos bristled. "Tell me what it is you seek, then." "You already know." The stranger scoffed. He knew nothing. What did he want? "I do not." Grimacing, Naruto made a fist with his free hand. A dull crunch near their home was the only warning before something streaked over the head of Kratos. To the untrained eye, they for more than one object arrowed towards the blonde appeared little more than typical Spartan weapons flung by an unseen hand. The spear bore a long shaft with a steel tip, sporting faded crimson tints. A long scarlet gold strip of cloth lay wrapped around its worn haft, fluttering now in the sharp breeze as it flew. But not alone. With it arced a battered shield forged of bronze scarlet, emblazoned with the Greek lambda symbol upon it, streaking unerringly towards the startled form of the stranger. The latter caromed wildly off the man's skull, sending him stumbling off his prone form. But it was the former that slammed into Naruto's now open palm. Scything his legs beneath him, the boy sprang to his feet and moved to flank the stunned Baldur. For a moment it seemed luck and skill were with him, for he caught the tattooed deity just as he was climbing back to his feet. Battering him headlong with the heavy shield, he once more sent him staggering away in a daze. When the blonde moved to continue his assault, he caught a vicious right hook on the chin for his efforts. Kratos needed no further provocation. In a bolt of frozen fury, the Leviathan axe rejoined the fray, swinging down at the stranger's side in a horizontal slash to bite deeply into his right side. A wet cough answered him as the stranger pulled himself off the frozen metal, only to find himself launched bodily into the air by the follow-up attack. Perhaps his son sensed his intent. Perhaps not. Regardless of the fact, the boy leaped back into the fray. An overhead slam from Naruto continued the combo and slammed Baldur into the earth, to which Kratos whirled around and repeated the same swing, this time in the opposite direction. Caught between spear and axe, the stranger laughed as he was tossed about. Yes, that's more like it. Vicious alternating strikes descended on him from every angle, left, right, horizontal, vertical, and beyond. A storm of blows no man, no god could ever hope to escape from, and throughout, he made only the most meager of efforts to defend himself. Rather, he seemed to prioritize offense over defense. Hammer-like fists, metal shield, and flesh alike, sparing no discrimination for either. Still they fought on, covering for one another. Where one opening emerged, another always stepped in to block, shielding the other from harm. Words were wasted here. This was the field of battle. Yet no matter how much they hammered at him, his wounds closed faster than they could inflict them. Yet the trio raged back and forth what seemed like hours, days, weeks. Finally, as all things do, the battle came to an abrupt end. A lunging downward thrust from Naruto cut the stranger's legs out from under him, just as Kratos brought his axe around for an upward smash. Caught full on by the deadly weapon, the stranger actually grunted in a short muted note of surprise and was hurled upward once more. This time, the opportunity did not go unnoticed. Got you. Roaring, Naruto came out of a roll and leaped at the still airborne deity, his body clad in that fading red aura as he stabbed down with the full length of his spear. Trapped between the honed edge of the spear and the earth, Baldur's body had no choice but to yield. It was a good thrust, Kratos mused. Simple and clean. It pierced through flesh and bone effortlessly and found the heart. One final wrench ought to wedge the barbed edge firmly within the wound, hopefully binding it in place. To his disbelief, the tattooed god only laughed. Is that all? In an impossibly quick movement, Baldur's knee lashed out, catching the boy in his torso. Reeling from the blow, he wasn't prepared for what came next. Baldur was not amused. Whatever lingering sensation he'd felt had long since faded with his wounds, turned numb by that accursed spell. Infuriatingly, he retained the ability to taste, thus remaining keenly aware of the blood in his mouth. Beyond that, nothing. It was painfully disappointing. No, he decided. He couldn't afford to kill this boy. Not yet. Should he die, his sole chance to feel again might well die with him. Whatever minuscule chance there might be of breaking this wretched spell curse, his mind bleated, would surely cease to exist if he ended his life, unlike Daddy Dearest over there. Of course, that didn't mean he couldn't inflict some pain. He just needed to be a bit creative in his methods. The lad seemed durable after all. You stay put, now. Ripping the spear from his own torn body, he spun and slammed it through the boy's stomach, its jagged edge erupting out his back in a shower of sickly scarlet. Red eyes snapped into blue with a gasp. Like a candle cast in the wind, the crimson aura surrounding him guttered out, a dying flame ebbing away into nothingness. In vain the boy's hand sought the wound and did the unthinkable. As two gods looked on, he seized the shaft of the spear and pulled, tearing it free in a fresh shower of viscera. Kratos nearly shouted him down for the mistake. Blood welled up between his fingers, and the boy dropped down to one knee, trying to stand, to carry on the fight, until finally, he fell. No, crimson descended over Kratos's vision in scarlet haze. Thought abandoned him and he lunged forward headlong into battle. He saw, rather than felt, his body drop the axe and grapple with the stranger, as though he were outside himself somehow, watching it all, yet unable to interact with anything. In spite of everything he'd ever done, all his attempts to tamp down his rage, all his self-control, he couldn't help himself. In that moment, he wanted nothing more than to snap the stranger's neck and every bone in his body if given the chance. He knew gut wounds. They were often death to whomever received them. The boy, Naruto, he might not. Time and time again, he'd seen him heal from minor wounds, yet nothing so grievous as this one. Though he longed to go to him, to avail him of his pain, his body held sway in that moment over his mind. In the end, the rage won. The rage always won in the end. For all his fury, the tattooed deity soon proved himself nearly Kratos' equal in raw strength. Though the ground began to bend and buckle beneath them, still he strove against him, snarling obscenities. Even as they struggled against one another, their clash caused the ground to collapse underfoot, creating a progressively larger and deeper fissure beneath them. Still the two titans struggled against one another. Neither paid their bodies any heed. They fought on like gods of old, the earth sundering, world shaking. When Odin sent me here, I just needed answers, but you had to act all proud. The stranger snarled. As if to echo that cry, the world shook beneath them anew as the chasm continued to spread in miles beyond their battle. Throw whatever you have at me, I'll keep coming, and that old body will give out. But before I end this, I want you to know one thing. A mad, half-crazed smile flashed out at him. I can't feel any of this light. It flooded Naruto's vision in a thunderclap of sound, jolting him back to consciousness with a start. A spike of pain in his torso nearly drove him down into the black and silenced him altogether. Curling inward against the sudden surge of agony burning his world a thousand shades of white, the young man grit his teeth, fighting off a silent scream. He felt the hole in his stomach as clearly as one with the loss of a limb, and the sheer pain of the wound nearly drove him mad outright. Already he could feel his body reacting to the sudden injury, trying to muster up enough energy to heal him even as he bled out. Could he recover? He didn't want to die, not like this, not when there was still so much left to do. The sudden thought of death caused the boy to tremble, if only for the uncertainty it brought with it. He'd never taken a wound like this. Some deep cuts perhaps, but nothing like this. Baldur had pierced something vital with his spear, and in tearing the weapon out, he'd felt something tear. Even now his world seemed paler somehow as he looked on, draining of all color, leaving naught but gray behind. Gray. He didn't know what to do with gray. As though his life were but a canvas and the artist had left it unfinished, leaving him behind to rot. Of the forest of their home he saw nothing, only blinding, endless white. I greet thee, fallen warrior. A solemn, musical voice rang in his ears like a clarion call. Do you seek the gates of Valhalla? Incredibly, those words numbed the haze of agony. Like a bomb pressed against the gaping tear, he felt some semblance of his strength return. But only a sliver. In disbelief, he strained his gaze and fought to raise his head off the snow. He almost immediately found himself wishing he hadn't done so, if only because the sight awaiting him nearly struck him blind on the spot. He saw her, in all her towering majesty. A being spirit, clad in peerless armor, hung over him, so pale as to be nearly translucent. Perhaps she was borne aloft on feathered yet seemingly tainted somehow wings of spun gold. Armed and armored as if for battle, she loomed before him. Silent and regal in her majesty, she did not speak, her helmeted head simply regarding him in silent contemplation. Was he hallucinating? Seeing things? Surely he must be. Even he knew a Valkyrie when he saw one. They were warrior of legend, myth, rarely seen here in Midgard by anyone other than ... Oh. If a Valkyrie was here for him, that could only mean... Who are? A slim hand extended, slender fingertips beckoning to him from within the light. I am known as Ire. Come, warrior. Her voice both dulled his senses and filled him with a strange sense of longing. Come away to your well-earned rest. I am alone in my task and the dead are many. I do not have the luxury of time. The last word reactivated Naruto. Time? I don't have time to be resting, now. Growling, the whiskered warrior crawled to his knees. Perhaps mistaking his movement for acceptance, Ire reached for him. At such proximity, Naruto brief glimpsed the eyes lingering behind that helmet. Somehow he managed to tear his gaze away from the winged spirit and muster his senses. No. Wait. Hold it. I'm not dead. Rather fond of living, in fact. Ah, there it was. He felt a strange twitching sensation in his stomach, a sure sign that he was either about to expire altogether or his ailing body had finally cobbled together enough energy and kick-started some semblance of regeneration. Regardless, the notion of taking the offered hand to him was immediately foreign to him, and thus he refused. He was needed here, in Midgard with his family, not the feasting halls of boorish gods who didn't give a fig for mortal affairs. No matter how tempting the idea might be, Ire's helmeted head cocked aside, commanding his attention. Then you mean to challenge me, warrior? He glimpsed the mace at her side. Inwardly, Naruto blanched. Well, I'd rather not. Those who fought a Valkyrie and refused death became a Draugr. He remembered that much from mother's tales. Should a warrior decline the call of the Valkyrie and engage her in battle, that warrior will be burnt by the intensity of the fight and be doomed to forever roam the mortal realm as undead. Now had no desire to become one of those mindless things, least of all while he stood at death's door. But what other alternative was there? He couldn't simply submit and leave father behind, much less Atreus, not after all he'd said and done. To simply give up now ... It was unacceptable. Anathema ... But I can't die. Steeling himself, he met her gaze. Not yet. A beat of silence passed between the two of them. Remarkably, the Valkyrie relented. Very well. Pain flared in his stomach, yet it was a good pain, cleansing him of the fog that had fallen over him. With a supreme effort of will he climbed to his feet. Once there he found that the bleeding had indeed ceased. In its place stood healthy pink flesh. Tender to the touch perhaps, and a bit raw, but a far cry from the great tear he'd sported moments before. As though spurred by the realization of his recovery, the light dimmed. A faint sensation of being pulled tugged at his psyche. Somewhere, the scales had tipped, and he felt himself being drawn back, color rushing back in place of the overwhelming gray. For a moment, just a fleeting instant, he caught a glimpse of paradise behind Ire's wings. Then the Valkyrie's gentle, pale hand graced his chest. Though I cannot speak for my missing sisters. Her helmet tilted, regarding him curiously. I pray that we meet again, warrior. Naruto's world rushed back. Now there was pain. Atreus opened his eyes. Having squeezed them shut for so long against the chaos raging outside, the light, dim though it was, proved nearly blinding for the poor boy. Even here in the dark cellar, the dank scent of musty furs pervading his nose, he still couldn't make sense of what had transpired. His ears still rang with the sound of splintered wood, of steel striking steel, the terrible sound of torn flesh. He'd only glimpsed the stranger for a mere moment before the door slammed in his face, but the sight stuck with him, that ghastly bearded face curving in a cruel smile. Even now those horrible words lingered. What have we here? Then his brother had roared at him to hide, and so he hid beneath the floor, dread coiling like a silver snake within his stomach. The noises that followed would haunt his dreams for months to come. A terrible racket, a melody of destruction, as if the world were tearing itself apart around him. Steel shattered. Boulders ground themselves apart. And the screams, oh, the screams. Now all the world lay fallen silent around him, still as the grave. No, not quite silent, he realized, he heard. Something. A faint thumping sound scraped against his senses. Hello. His voice trembled in his ears. He hated it. Young hands strained against the hatch, to no avail. It wouldn't budge. Their father had either locked it, or something terribly heavy had fallen upon it and trapped him here. Judging by the sullen creak the rickety frame offered up, Atreus suspected it was the latter. Well, this was going to be a problem. He wasn't possessed of incredible strength. Like his brother and father, his talents lay in the realm of archery. Precise shots were his forte. Well, when he didn't miss, could he have done something to help his family? No. The truth proved a bitter pill to swallow. Self-loathing welled up in him anew as he sank back to the floor, tucking his knees against his chest. What use was he in a fight when he couldn't even protect himself? He might be an archer, but in comparison to father, no, even his brother, he knew his skills were sorely lacking. It wasn't that he resented them, just, A harsh creak captured his attention, and with a jolt, someone ripped the hatch away to flood the room with light. Unable to stand the sudden illumination, the boy wiped his pallid cheeks and averted his gaze. Flinging up a hand, he squinted through his fingers. Discerning what he believed to be a familiar shape through the blinding radiance, joyous tears sprang to his eyes. His body betrayed him, bolting to its feet in a rush of euphoria. You're all right. Harsh coughing answered him. I wouldn't say that, little brother. When that familiar face emerged, however, Atreus nearly jerked back out of shock. A horrified gasp tore out of him before he could think to hold it back. It was Naruto, to be sure. There could be no question about that. Bright blue eyes blazed out at him, framed by stark blonde hair and whiskered cheeks. But he'd taken a beating and been bloodied for it. One eye was swollen shut, and his nose looked to have been broken and forcibly set at some point during battle. His attire appeared to have taken the worst of it, those once proud furs now battered and torn around his shoulders. Worse were his weapons. The arms of Sparta, or what remained of them, lay strapped to his torso, a dented shield covering his back alongside the pieces of a sundered spear tied to his belt. Atreus felt a pang of loss at the sight of the shattered weapon, knowing they had been his brother's favorite tool. Perhaps a talented smith might yet repair them, but given that they knew no such person, he doubted their fate. Well, let's not keep you down there any longer, his brother declared, jarring him out of his reverie with a start. Up we go. Reluctantly, he grasped the offered hand and allowed himself to be hoisted up over the edge. He nearly flinched when he beheld their home. Naught but shattered timber awaited his gaze. Belatedly, he realized the light stemmed not just from the door but the roof itself, as well as the southern wall. Now that he glanced about, he discovered much of their home had been flung into disarray. Someone had smashed a hole through them both without so much as a second thought. The force it must have taken to do so was worrying, to say the least. That blood. Oh, this. Pretty sure it's mine. There was a high, wild light to his brother's gaze, as though he didn't truly see him. He'd likely gone into shock. It's funny really, he rambled on as he scuttled about their home. I thought I was dead. Then I met a Valkyrie. Now I'm not. Life is strange, I suppose. Catch. His bow and quiver sailed across the room at him, the latter brimming with fresh arrows. Atreus caught them both with practiced ease, slinging them over his shoulder only as an afterthought. Then and only then did the young marksman finally register the tale his beloved brother had accidentally relayed to him. Wait, he blinked. You died, and you saw a Valkyrie. The words tumbled out of him in a squawk. What did I miss? Naruto paused, cradling a small satchel in his offhand. See, it sounds less likely when you say it. Shrugging, the battered blonde slung said satchel over his shoulder and set out through the door without a second glance. Once more Atreus found himself forced to follow in his footsteps, to hasten after him lest he be left behind altogether. Even then he was hard-pressed to keep up. Their home loomed behind them like a mournful parent, bidding them farewell. Confusion spurred him to speak. "Where are we going?" Naruto didn't slow, not in the least. His sibling regarded him with a patient, if somewhat incredulous look. "We're leaving, of course," he said. "We can't stay here. That man will come back." Atreus nearly tripped over his own feet. "What?" he sputtered. "But where?" "Anywhere that isn't here." They walked in silence for a time, snow crunching beneath their boots. Atreus clutched his bow to his chest. The notion of leaving their home behind proved painful enough on its own. To do this so soon after losing mother threatened to tear his heart out altogether. Still, he trusted his brother. Naruto wasn't the sort to lie. Yes, he might be mischievous at times, and he possessed a stubborn streak a mile long, but he was also honest to a fault. He wouldn't steer him wrong, surely. "What about father?" Atreus pressed. "We don't know where he went. He could be." His brother paused to consider. "We'll just have to find him, then." Together, the two brothers determinedly set out to do just that. The rage always won. Like some fell beast determined to tear him apart and feast upon his marrow, it always set upon Kratos at the worst of moments, rending his mind limb from limb, denying him the peace he sought. In the end, no matter how hard he struggled against it, his anger always got the better of him. Long hunts availed him naught. Fighting only quickened the blood. For a time Faye and his family had proven a balm for his anger, yet with her passing it only became more insatiable. He knew he should take solace in the fact that he wasn't alone, yet it only made him all the more bitter. He didn't know how to be father to one son, much less two. He didn't know how to take on that role again, not without her. Now even the last remnants of that once peaceful life had been stripped away. With the stranger's arrival he'd been forced to face his old life, to succumb to the rage once more. In the end, it had triumphed. It always did. But how had that man found them? A niggling doubt nearly made him turn back, nearly spurred him to descend into the crevasse after the stranger, if only to make certain he'd perished. Surely he had. None could survive a broken neck, much less the fall that followed. Anyone who could was someone he was not prepared to face with his bare hands alone. Alone. The thought brought back a painful reminder of his failure. Naruto. The boy was gone. It had been a mortal wound to be sure. Not only had Atreus lost a brother, but he had failed a son. He should have been stronger, faster. He had not been. Now he would return to find his bloodied corpse strewn in the snow, his eyes shut, never to open again. A light extinguished forever. To lose him as well as Faye, so soon after her untimely demise. The thought left his limbs heavy as he shuffled forward. Thus it came as something of a surprise when they met him midway. Spattered in his own blood he walked among the fallen trees, his glassy blue eyes gazing blankly up into the branches. His tanned face had been reduced to a ghastly pallor almost akin to his own, as though he'd seen a ghost, but even as he looked on the color was returning to that whiskered visage. Atreus dithered mere moments before he saw him. That pale visage lit with joy, one Kratos didn't know how to reciprocate. He was glad to see them alive of course, but to express it. "Father," Kratos offered a noncommittal grunt. Part of him was almost chuffed to find that his son had survived. The other, however, "Boy," Naruto whistled innocently. "What? It wasn't me this time, I swear." The god of war loomed large over his progeny. Kratos would have none of it, none of this deflection, none of this sullen silence interposed by witty remarks. Juxtaposed to the idea of leaving him alone even after that miracle, he straightened his back and advanced, his sights set solely upon the boy who perished. It was incomprehensible. He'd seen him take that wound to his gut. Few were capable of surviving such a grievous, himself included. That his son was standing before him here, fresh as a daisy, with naught to show but a hole in his furs concerned him. The boy's mental state, more so. "You were dead." Those eerie blank eyes turned down, avoiding his gaze. "And now I'm not. Funny how that works." Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a slight, nervous scowl. "Can we not talk about this?" Strong hands settled on either side of his shoulders before he could step backward, causing him to stiffen. "No." When Kratos spoke, the words emerged as a low growl. "We will speak of it now." They walked on in silence. Kratos said not a word. Atreus fidgeted. Neither looked at Naruto. Their silence was expansive and ordinarily would have rattled him had he not expected such. Really, the boy couldn't bring himself to blame them for the hush that had fallen over their little group. He understood that it wasn't their fault. Father had forced the words from him as Atreus listened. Neither knew precisely how to process the tale they were told. Fair enough. Naruto was having more than a little difficulty accepting the truth himself, and he'd been the one to experience it in the first place. By the sage, he should be dead. He had died. And yet here he was, walking, talking. Even now with their journey underway, he still grappled with it. Sometimes he triumphed over it. Sometimes, like his temper, he got the better of him. Sometimes he felt his blue eyes burn red in a rage that wasn't his own. Something had awoken in his soul after death and he wasn't quite sure he liked it. Still, he'd met a Valkyrie. He had seen the pearly gates of Valhalla and denied them. How many could speak to such a thing? None he knew, certainly. Take her ashes to the highest peak and spread them there. That was the task he would focus on. nothing else. Dad ... Father ... was a man of few words. If he had something to say, later, he would say it. By contrast, his beloved little brother looked fit to burst. No doubt he was still full of questions. There would be time enough for those last. They were each of them hollowed by grief, each adjusting in their own way. But they would get past this. They always did. Naruto smiled softly, kept walking, focused on putting one foot in front of the other. In the end, that was all a soldier, a man, could hope to do. Keep on walking, bear the trials life threw in you, and keep on marching. For now, that was the best he ought to hope for. Take things 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day at a time. You're falling behind, boy. Coming. He grinned and trotted after them. One day he would die for real, and on that day his death would stick. Fortunately, that day was not here. Not yet. Not now. For now, the journey continued. Just keep walking. That dream again. Freya opened her eyes and found her face damp. She scowled at her weakness, dashing a tear from her cheek with the back of her fist. That wasn't what had awoken her. No, something else had. There was a disturbance in her woods. Someone had tripped one of her wards. She felt it in her bones, a presence strangely familiar, yet alien all the same. And with that feeling came dread. Had he found her at last? Tracked her down with his ravens? Would she have to flee? Where would she even go? ... And oh, if this was to be her end, then she would meet it with honor. Even if she couldn't fight back against that bastard, she would at least die with dignity. Drawing herself up from her cot, she snatched up her satchel and raised her house from beneath the earth with a wave of her hand. From there she slipped outside. A whispered spell entangled the undergrowth before her, opening the woodlands for her once more. Dappled sunlight spilled forth, the sweet light of mid-morning warming her face. Even from here she could hear the ruckus, the snapping of branches, the shouting of voices, the tearing of trees. Someone was certainly chasing something, though she knew not what. Blast it all. She was going to have to investigate this herself, wasn't she? Bare feet patted against the dirt. Slow. Too slow. Much too slow. She hated this form. Missed her long legs, she did. Was it not enough that he had ripped away her wings? That he trapped her here in Midgard, never to return home, to see her brother or her family? Of course not. Cursing her wasn't enough. Odin didn't care that she'd been rendered unable to harm any living being through means magical or physical. No, crippling her wasn't enough. He wanted to humiliate her, and so he'd done this to her. For you see, Odin's spite ran deep. In a final act of cruelty, he had trapped her in this form, leaving her in the guise of a child, a mere girl, a flowering fledgling. And a small one at that. She'd lost half her height. Did he have any idea how difficult it was to cast her spells in such a state? Never mind living in such a form, tending a garden, anything at all. To build a house. Absolute arse. Just thinking of it left her seething. Damn it, damn him to Helheim. Freya's foot caught a root as walked and she went flying with a curse, tumbling into the dirt. Dignity alone kept her face intact. She righted herself with a long-suffering sigh. Accursed little legs. Another slight to repay her oath of an ex-husband for. If she could just recover her wings, she might be able to break the bindings that held her to this weaker, lesser form, this facsimile. But she didn't even know where to look. No. Dwelling on the past didn't help. Focus on the here and now. Quelling her anger, she followed the noise to its source. Soon enough her patience was rewarded. Hildisvini, her old friend, burst from the brush ahead of her. At a gallop. She spied something wrong at once. The boar was badly wounded, eyes rolling in his head, all but squealing with terror. You're hurt. She held out her arms to him. Poor thing. Come here, let me see your wounds. The reason for her old friend's terror soon became apparent as a blur of bloody red raced out of the undergrowth. A primal roar of triumph pierced the air, then said scarlet streak struck the boar and took it down like a lion would a lamb, all but hammering him into the ground. Thor himself couldn't have done better. She had time enough to glimpse blonde hair, whiskered cheeks, and wild red eyes. Clawed hands swiped down, ready to disembowel. Wait, she flung out a hand. Don't kill him, I beg you. The boy froze atop his prize, stiffening beneath her plea. He glared at her, eyes red and wild, chest heaving. No, not a boy, she realized. It would be so easy to think of him as young at a glance, but she saw deeper. There was power in this seemingly feral creature, strength sealed and suppressed so much like her own, but whatever curse he suffered from ran far deeper. For all his might, his true potential was bound by powerful magics. No, perhaps that wasn't the right word. This was magic, yet not magic, a kind she'd not seen before. So much power. He'd kill her, she realized. He would absolutely kill her if she didn't think quickly. Peace. She held up a hand. I mean you no harm. He snarled at her in response, teeth gone sharp, eyes glowing red. Come. She willed a thread of golden magic his way, trying to pluck him out his rage. Friendly. The boy straightened with a snarl as her words rippled over him. It was enough. Red eyes dimmed to blue and that ominous red aura around him dimmed. Why? He blinked, coming back to himself. Looked down at the poor boar pinned beneath his boot, wheezing for breath. Oh, touched a hand to his bloody face. Again. He muttered to himself, still palming his whiskered visage. I lost control, didn't I? I'm sorry. He turned to face her with a sheepish smile. Please tell me I didn't hurt you. He sounded so mournful in that instant. The mother in Freya wanted nothing more than to wrap him up in her arms and never let him go. She resisted by the merest of margins. Something told her the boy wouldn't much appreciate that. He didn't seem the sort, certainly not after that display. You didn't, she said instead. Would you mind letting that boar go? The boy looked down at Hildesvini, still trapped under his boot. He was meant to be our lunch. Her boar squealed out an imprecation. Don't pout. The boy clicked his tongue at him. I would have killed you quickly. Not my fault Atreus missed your vitals. Freya grimaced despite herself. He wasn't alone, then. That might prove problematic. If there were more of his number here, her presence might be well and truly exposed. What is he to you? The boy asked of her, drawing her out of her reverie. A pet. She placed a fist on her hip and scowled his way. He's my friend. He seemed to consider her words for a moment. At length, he nodded. Up came his boot. Then I'll help you get that arrow out of him. Good. She granted him a grim nod. Hold him steady. He's losing blood. Together, they went to work, kneeling before the battered boar. Name's Naruto, the blonde said apropos of nothing. Freya hid a grimace in her work. Frigg. She loathed using Odin's old nickname for her, but she dare not reveal her true name. Not a stranger such as him. Best she use an acronym to conceal herself. If others had found their way into the forest so easily, it would only be a matter of time before others wormed their way in. She'd have to prepare. Naruto's gaze narrowed on hers. Strange name. Sounds familiar. She quailed a little. I am not your enemy. Ain't me you have to convince. The brush parted behind him as someone else came crashing through. Brother, there you are. A young boy bowled into the clearing, bearing a bow on his back. I thought we lost you after you ran off. Did you kill the boar? Hildesvini squealed angrily, causing the boy to wince. Naruto only laughed. We'll find something else to eat, little brother. Frey found herself smiling despite it all. They were siblings, then. How quaint. But where were their parents? Boy, a deep, resonant voice boomed in the distance, rattling her very bones. I told you not to run ahead. Naruto winced. Before she could even think to steady herself, a great mountain of a man clad in piecemeal armor burst through a gap in the stone behind her and landed before them. His skin was pale as ash, marked by swirling red, his brow dark and stern. He paused, saw her, just as she saw him. His bearded face drew down in a grimace. Who is this? Freya stiffened, all her words turning to so much ash in her mouth. This was a god. She could sense it. He didn't hail from this realm, or even from her pantheon, but he was divine all the same. There could be no denying it. Blood stained his soul. She could see it. This was a god killer. Panic bleated in her breast. If he realized what she was ... if he took it into his head to slay her ... well, she'd not be able to do a thing about it. Her magic might have calmed Naruto, but it wouldn't work on someone like this. Naruto swept out a hand between them. She's a friend, old man. Don't get your boots in a twist. The man's face grew thunderous. Boy, a younger lad saved her from answering a painful question with one of his own. We didn't know the boar belonged to anyone. Freya favored him with a small smile, grateful for small mercies. He doesn't. He's a dear companion of mine. A dear companion, one of the few Odin hadn't taken from her. That seemed to take some of the fire out of the old god. The boy was following my command. He is not at fault. Then help fix this. She latched onto his wrist and dragged his hands down to the boar, replacing Naruto's palms to better steady her boar. Hold here, please. She didn't give him time to protest. Younger or no, she was still a commander at heart. Hold, I said. He's losing blood. The bearded god complied with an annoyed grunt, and an irritated grumble stole out of her in turn as they worked. The last of his kind in all the realm, and you try to eat him. For food. The younger boy grimaced. Target practice. Had she still been capable of harming others, Freya would have given the little lad a good hard shake. Target practice. Naruto made miserable noise. Didn't know he was your friend. Atreus gave her a glum nod. I'm so sorry. No, it's fine. She scowled at their father. Keep that pressure on. The blame is mine. I should have kept a closer eye. Atreus whimpered a little. Will he die? She hissed. I will not let him. What followed was touch and go at best. She bid the pale man, curious that neither boy looked a thing like him, to hold the wound closed while she worked her magic. Their father remained unmoved. Naruto didn't bat an eye at it. Not so his younger brother. The little lad balked at her. You're a witch. I can't finish the healing here. She drew herself up with a grimace. My home is just beyond the trees there. You'll carry Hildesvini? Yes. The pale god hesitated. His sons implored him with their glares. Freya drove the last nail into the coffin of his resistance. You're the only one who can carry him. She flung her arms out. He must not die. He conceded at the last, taking the wounded boar into his arms. This way. She jerked her chin to one side. Follow. Naruto did so, forcing his family to do the same. The two of them fell into step with one another, walking ahead of his stoic father and sullen brother. Freya didn't pay them much mind at first. She watched the whiskered warrior instead, glancing at the bemused blonde out the corner of her eye. What was he? She didn't know, and she wouldn't have her answers here in any case. Not with his family watching. So she made small talk instead. That bow is a little big for you, isn't it? My mother made it for me. The little lad clutched at it defensively. Said I'd grow into it. A most wise mother he had indeed. I've never seen you in these woods. She must miss you being away from home. She's dead. Merely speaking the words seemed to physically pain him. We're taking her ashes to the highest peak in the realms. Her brow furrowed as they walked. Ashes. Naruto heaved a sigh. It was her last wish. Though at the rate we're going, Their father rumbled a warning behind them. Boy, I'm sorry for your loss. Freya interposed before another argument could brew. We're here, and they were indeed. Her tree awaited in the clearing beyond, and beneath it, shelter. Atreus piped up first, ever curious, just as Baldur had been. You live in a tree, not in it, below it. A wave of her hand and a muttered spell did the trick. The earth cracked and split as another of her dear friends emerged. Surely, a giant tortoise hiding her home from prying eyes. He loomed large over them, giving her guests pause. If only for a moment. Naruto whistled. Atreus rushed forward. Is he friendly? I promise you he's safe. She said it as much for the boy's sake as their father. Grumpy as he might be, she didn't miss the wonder in their young eyes. You can touch him if you like. Atreus didn't need any further prodding. You won't hurt anyone, will you? Hildisvini began to writhe in their father's arms. The boar kicking and squealing, she hastened their pace and ushered them inside. Quickly, place him on the stave there. Atreus looked around, noting the single bed as their father laid Hildisvini down upon the floor. You live alone, too. Pain stabbed at Freya's heart, tearing the scar off an old wound. She suppressed it. It's better this way. Even if it hurt, isolating herself was for the best, lest Odin try to take still more from her. A glum nod. Yeah, father doesn't like people either. Said father barked at him. Boy, well, you don't. From there it was a simple matter of distracting Naruto's father and brother with menial tasks to heal Hildisvini. Sending them out back to the garden might have been a touch excessive in hindsight, still it served her purposes. It wouldn't buy her much time, but it left her alone with him. It would be enough. Finally she could bear it no longer. Perhaps it was unwise to speak with his father and brother near, but she had to be certain. I know what you are, do you? Though he whispered back, Naruto didn't look up, still cleaning his face of blood. And what do you think I am? He continued to wipe himself down, never once looking at her, never meeting her eyes. You seem awfully certain of something. I know you're a god. She waited for a tensing of his shoulders, anything at all, but it never came. I'm not sure if you're of this realm, but there's no mistaking it. Still no reaction. She chose a different approach. Your little brother doesn't know, does he? Your true nature, or his own. Naruto sighed. Kurato's dad, he corrected himself, setting a hand on his dented shield. We'll deal with it. Such naivete. Was he truly divine, or just that stubborn? Freya almost pitied him his ignorance. The gods of these realms don't take kindly to outsiders. She warned him. Trust me, I know. When they find you, and they will, they'll make trouble for you. They already have. He raised his gaze, eyes gone dark. She noticed his injuries, healing perhaps, but still visible where one to squint. It looked like someone had punched him a great many times. She could think of only one god who used his fists. Sending Baldur after such a boy. Was there no end to Odin's cruelty? Her heart ached anew and she sensed a story there. Best not to pry. Then you were lucky to escape them. We were. He considered her for a long moment. I died. She wasn't even given time to dwell on that remark, because his gaze was fixed firmly on her again. Seems we're both in the same boat. Freya, her very soul stilled. I haven't the foggiest idea what you mean. Stop that. His fist struck the wall, producing a harsh crack. Do not lie to me. She didn't dare after that display. Rather than deny, she sat before Hildisvini and began to stroke the boar's battered hide. What gave me away? Naruto plunked down beside her. I had my suspicions. Here at last his eyes met her, gaze biting deep. You used magic to calm me back there. I felt it. A normal witch couldn't do that. That was the power of a god, however weakened it was. And those spells just now, you're wholly in tune with nature. I may look dull, but I know my stories, and I read all about the Queen of the Valkyries when I was younger. Although, and here a wry smile curved his lips, I didn't think you'd be quite so young in person. Anger loosed her tongue. I did not choose to look like this. He gave her a rueful grin. So it is a curse, then. You just confirmed my theory. Thanks for that. Freya's face closed down. Clever boy. Dangerous boy. He'd sussed her out in an instant. She'd best be wary of him. Were she wiser and not so desperate for allies, she would have fled by now. But she was desperate. And besides, this irascible rascal had caught her eye. He'd proven himself to have a sharper wit than his younger brother, and more approachable than his father. Moreover, that power of his, it was potent. She could sense it even now, pulsing in his stomach, beating in time with his heart. It went well beyond anything she'd ever felt from the Allfather. The power to kill a god. Did such strength slay Odin? Perhaps, she began slowly, choosing her words with infinite care, the two of us can reach an accord. How so? You seek to be free from the chains binding you, just as I do mine. When he didn't challenge her, she barreled onward. We both have no love for the gods of this realm. Our goals aligned. Sure. His elbow jostled hers. Whatever you say, short stuff. Freya twitched. I beg your pardon. I am not short. Sorry. Naruto set a hand to his ear. Couldn't hear you down there. Impudent. She scowled up at him. You're only a head taller than me. He waggled a brow at her, a prankster even now. Only, she scowled. You're being an ass. I'm trying to cheer you up, is what I'm doing. He laughed it off. You can give me a good smack if you like. Don't mind. Any mirth she might have felt died in that instant. I cannot. He laughed, not comprehending. Sure, you can. You misunderstand. I can't. His eyes widened with realization. Clever, clever boy. He really another curse, then. Among other things. She looked away with a bitter smile. I am a shadow of what I once was. As, I suspect, are you. Dunno about that. Naruto shrugged, leaning against the wall. My memories are fuzzy at best. A hand rose and he gazed at it as though it were foreign to him. Even if they weren't, I don't think they'd change who I am now. I want to protect those close to me. A pause followed as he considered something. These curses of yours ... do they preclude you from having friends? Her lips pursed. They do not? No. Well, there you go. Let's be friends. Freya barked a laugh at that demanding boy. Admit it, he snickered in return. I'm growing on ya. Indeed you are. She sighed, but the sound lacked rancor. Like a tumor. Kratos found himself somewhat concerned. Admittedly, he did not show it well. He knew he didn't. It was a source of never-ending frustration for the Spartan. He'd seldom saw his softer side these days. Even now, after all these years, he often had great difficulty expressing anything beyond simple stoicism. Some might call him blunt, laconic, reserved, even. Perhaps they had the right of it. But he was not cold as they might claim, nor was he blind to what was unfolding here before his very eyes. Hold still, you. I can't place the protection stave if you keep squirming. Naruto laughed despite the girl's admonishment, grinning as her fingers traced his neck. I'm trying, but it tickles. What he saw taking place before him. It concerned him a great deal. Kratos was not often prone to fits of introspection these days, but he found himself dwelling on such things now. This girl who tended to his eldest boy. There was more to her than met the eye. For one so small the girl was wise in the old ways, but his concern went beyond her magics. It was her personality. She was quick to take charge, an admirable quality in a warrior, yet she was clearly too small to be one. She reminded him of Faye, a younger version, perhaps, quick of wit, and able to coax rare responses out of him as few could these days. This, he thought, was good. The boy had been too quiet, lately, sullen. The warrior in him wished to dismiss such things and hasten onward. They had a long road ahead and their time was wasted dallying here. Faye's voice nagged at him. He imagined what she might say. This is good for him, grumbles. Let him linger a while. He wanted to heed her voice. He was hurting from her death still. To take it out on the boy would be unfair. And yet there was the way this girl carried herself. Walked, talked, even, like an adult trapped in a child's body. Was she under a curse of some sort? Moreover, was she a danger to them? He did not wish her such. The girl had been helpful, thus far, though he was loath to admit it. They had harmed her boy after all. A debt was owed. He would see it repaid and seek better counsel before making such a judgment. Atreus appeared to have made his nevertheless. He caught his son staring from a wooden chair, grinning as his brother squabbled with the girl. Naruto had splashed some of that strange gold paint on her face, which had her admonishing him all over again, but he only laughed all the louder. She's nice, huh? The lad chuckled. Can't remember the last time I heard brother laugh like that. Kratos tried to restrain a grunt. He failed. HRRMPH. Atreus was of his blood, yet the boy was not. Did that make him any less his son? No, he had found him alone in that strange place, within the fire and flames, and taken him in. Whatever his blood, he was his boy ... even if he did not know how to woo. That, Kratos supposed, was his own fault. He'd never seen the need to teach him such. There were always more important skills to learn. Atreus did not understand. He was green. He did not see the bond blooming between these two. This fleeting connection, this tiny tenuous thread that one day, someday, perhaps years from now, might bloom into something more. Atreus could not see it. But he did. Yes, it concerned him. Very much so. Kratos did not believe in fate. Prophecies were meant to be broken. But he could not bring himself to sever this thread. A lifetime ago, he just might have. Fortunately, he was no longer that man. He would wait, for now. He would see. And if she became a danger, he would act. Hold still, you. I can't place the protection stave if you keep squirming. I'm trying to. Naruto didn't bother to hide his smile. But it tickles. You're doing this on purpose, ain't ya? I am not. Be still. Oh, Freya exhaled in a long-suffering sigh and bit down on her smile as she traced a fresh protection stave into his neck. He'd already messed up the last one with his squirming. Even now Naruto shivered and laughed all the while, forcing her to make slow, broad strokes. For someone who'd nearly butchered a boar only a few hours ago, he seemed awfully ticklish. Come on, that tickles. She tutted a little at that. It'll do more than tickle if I don't apply this properly. That had him simmering down. His smile faded, replaced by a dour look. All right, I'll be good. Ouch. She fought down a grimace of her own, not liking the way the light had gone out his eyes just now. Was this her fault? Nonsense. She chided herself for such thoughts a second later. She was the goddess of love, battle, and fertility. Hers was not the heart of some mere maiden to be wooed, and she had sworn never to fall for that trap again. Love was a lie. Odin had proven that. There could be no such emotion when you didn't know the other party, and she certainly didn't know this brash blonde enigma of a boy. So why was she faltering so? Naruto didn't remind her of Baldur. It wasn't that. No, not in the least. If anything, his antics made her think of a less drunken Thor ... and wasn't that saying something? There could be no relation there, though. It just wasn't possible. Thor only had two boys the last she'd seen. Magni and Modi. Then there was Thrud, gods, she'd been a child when she saw her last. She'd spend years in Asgard. She would have remembered someone like this, surely. Odin had done much to her, taken much from her, but he couldn't meddle with her mind. She'd prepared for such a horror, taken countermeasures he'd never been able to breach. Then why in Valhalla did this boy seem so familiar? She'd felt this feeling before. This heat, this fire, and that lightning spark in his eyes. He had a curious air about him that of someone who'd lived a life before. She was so close to an answer, she just knew it. Could he really be a? Naruto's hand touched hers and her train of thought derailed faster than a minecart on a rickety rail. Thanks for this, he hummed at her. I appreciate it. Really, I do. She tutted and looked away. It's nothing, hey. He grabbed her and drew her close. So you're supposed to be queen of the Valkyries, eh? His lips met her ear in a soft whisper. I met a Valkyrie. Her name was Ire. Give her my regards if you see her. Yeah. That girl's still alive. Just what have you seen? The boy only grinned. In that instant a spark of scarlet passed between their interlocked fingers. Frey felt something shifted in her soul. A tiny trace of her power trickled back into her. Not much, not enough to break any of the curses binding her, not in the truest sense of the word, but she felt something loosen deep inside her all the same. A stray semblance of strength. What are you, boy? Kratos barked, diverting her attention with his deep, resonant voice. We are leaving. He shrugged, gave her a wink, and bounded after his family. See you around. They certainly didn't linger. In a matter of moments they were gone. Freya watched them depart with a sigh. She shook her head. Foolishness. There was a certain noble savagery to this Naruto, if one could call it such, one that worried her. He clearly wasn't cruel. If he were, poor Hildisvini never would have been butchered on the spot. And yet this strange sense of unease persisted. He'd fought Baldur, no, that was something of a misnomer. He'd survived Baldur. Doubtless he had Odin's eye. A distant rumble of thunder rippled through the sky. Freya took her lower lip between her teeth and worried it nervously. They would be fine, surely. Their father was a god, to say nothing of Naruto's murkier origins. Surely they could fend for themselves. She'd done her best to mark them with protection staves, even if she wasn't quite sure Naruto's had entirely taken to him. Magic seemed to slip off that one like water off a Dreki's back. There was a reason she'd had to reapply it so many times. And yet, she counted to 10 until she was certain they were gone. Perhaps she would look in on him. She whispered a spell under her breath. Falky, her form shrank and sprouted feathers, followed by wings and a beak now as she assumed an avian form. From there it was the work of a moment to reorient herself. She'd given them more than enough of a head start by now. Surely, doubtlessly they'd found the boat and set out by now. And if they hadn't ... well, no point in waiting, then. What was the worst they could kept up to? Someone yelped in the distance. Big snake, very big snake. With a frustrated scream, Freya took wing and hurled after Naruto's family. Ire struggled. She could feel the corruption eating away at her. For every soul she saved, Valkyrie or no, she had her limits. She was falling, just like the rest of her sisters. Soon enough, she too would falter. But until then ... she persisted. There wasn't enough room in the boat for all three of them. In hindsight, Naruto knew it should have been obvious. Father was rather large and tall, and although Atreus was small, there simply wasn't room enough for a third body in the little canoe. Well, there was, but having three bodies to a boat at once left them sitting dangerously low in the lake and at risk of taking on water. Thankfully, that problem was easily remedied. You can walk on water. Of course he could. He wasn't sure how or why, but it was a skill his body remembered, or perhaps retained, one he'd not had a chance to use before now. The waters of the lake bubbled and hissed beneath his feet, but it held his weight, allowing him to plod after his brother and father in their little boat. Speaking of father ... oh, gods. He could feel Kratos glowering at him. You did not think to mention this. Always could. He shrugged as he rubbed at his neck, unwilling to look their way. His skin itched where Freya had traced her protection spell. Everything was frozen back at the house, so I didn't use it. Tiny flecks of gold paint came away under his fingers and he panicked, yanking his hand back. Never came up. Boy, he didn't much like the way father drawled that word just now. Look, Atreus cried out before another argument could bloom between them. Out there in the fog, I see a statue. A statue did indeed loom in the midst. Kratos steered the boat towards it. Runes lay within, glimmering gold. Sacrifice your arms to the center of the water. Atreus read them with a frown, peering through the grime. Awaken again the cradle of the world. He leaned back on the boat, wearing a pensive expression. Throw our weapons into the water. Guess that won't be a problem for you too. Naruto looked to Kratos, shrugged. Atreus squirmed under their gaze. Are ... you gonna do it? Kratos hefted the Leviathan axe. Naruto raised his dented Spartan shield. Together they let them fly, hurtling end over end into the depths. A moment passed. Another. 3, now. In unison, their hands rose. One returned. The other remained. Naruto hefted his soaked shield, but Kratos frowned at his still empty palm. The axe ... did not return. Beneath their boat, the water began to bubble. A deep, sonorous grumble shook the lake. And then, the water stirred. Perhaps stirred wasn't the right word. The lake absolutely sucked at their boat, its once peaceful surface churning into white water rapids. Naruto lost his footing and went down, would have drowned if Kratos didn't grab him and drag him into his arms. Hold on, boys. He heard a muffled grunt from Atreus. Okay. A massive shape rose from within the waters, casting them in its shadow as they looked on. Before their very eyes a great slitted eye opened, larger than all three of them put together. Still it rose, dwarfing them all, rearing back over them like a ... oh gods ... was that really a? Kratos summed it up quite nicely. What is this? Atreus gulped and whispered softly. It's the world serpent. Big snake. Naruto's mind babbled in a blind panic. Very big snake. Very big didn't even begin to describe this monster, this absolute behemoth rising from the water. Bigger than anything he'd ever seen. No, that wasn't quite right, was it? A sudden headache rattled his head, forcing him to grip his skull to stymie it. He'd seen something like this once before. HADNT. Not as big, but close. The pain in his temples intensified and the memory eluded him. With nary a sound, the serpent opened his gaping maw and spat something out. Father's axe came tumbling down and bit into the boat. He ripped it free, brandishing it before him. Stay calm, boys. I am. Atreus grinned. This is great. Naruto balked at his little brother. In what world? Much to his chagrin, the beast saw them. Its gaze followed him as he squirmed away from Kratos and settled himself to stand on the water's now calm surface once more. In that instant he could have sworn recognition passed through its gaze. It rumbled what might have been a greeting, its voice a deep bass rumble that tattled their ears, a noise he couldn't comprehend. Kratos reared back. It speaks. Yeah. Yet again, Atreus baffled him. Mom says he's friendly. Naruto flicked a look his way. What is it saying? I don't know. It loomed closer to them. No, to him. Aw, crap. Nice serpent. He held up his hands in a vain attempt to ward it away. Good serpent. Please don't eat me. Remarkably, it did not. Instead, it butted its snout against him, bringing with it the faint scent of the sea and another, more familiar smell he couldn't quite quantify. When it inhaled, Naruto nearly lost control of his legs altogether and pitched back into the water again. The serpent rumbled something else that almost sounded like a laugh and moved by to settle itself on the mountains past the lake. With his passing, the water level dropped around them, but he scarcely noticed at all. Atreus certainly did. That was amazing. I thought it was gonna eat you for sure. Naruto growled, still clutching. Atreus. The young boy blinked. Yeah, shush. His little brother did. If only for a moment. Wait, there's a shipwreck way over there. See that? He stabbed a finger that way. And there's the statue of Thor. Except, I can see a lot more of him now. There's a beach over there, too. I can even see the mountain. Look it. That building leads from the foot of it to that golden temple. There's even a dock there, next to the flag. Easy there, little brother. We'll get to it all sooner or later. Kratos rumbled in affirmative. The water dropped when the serpent rose. It was all there, just under the surface. Naruto let him talk. He was too busy trying to calm his hammering heart. That was a big snake. Docking the boat proved a simple matter. He followed at a slower pace, taking the temple in. Perhaps this golden temple had been grand once, but whatever it once was lay tarnished by its time in the sea. Flotsam and jetsam lay everywhere, heavy sea vines twining about braziers and statues alike. Atreus paid it no such heed. He was already darting ahead, gaze fixed on a familiar peak in the distance. Is this the way to the mountain? Kratos stepped past him. So it would seem. Well, if it isn't the bearded beaver and his sack seeds. A familiar voice brayed, cutting him off. Have I got something for you three? He knew that voice. Atreus perked up, seeing a familiar figure at the opposite end of the temple. Brock, but how did you get here ahead of us? None of your fucking business. The blue dwarf barked a laugh in the distance. Now get in here, I got something for you. And don't go macking pig eyes at my spot. I saw it first. The blonde brow arched. What do you think he wants? Kratos rumbled. To test our patience. The world went sideways. It all happened so fast. One moment Naruto was preparing a clever retort, in the next he heard an almighty crack of noise and found himself sprawled out on the floor. He rolled over, righting himself with a groan, only to fail as his left side spasmed. Sparks skittered over his body. His head felt like it was filled with clouds, his ears ringing as he struggled to right himself. What happened? An unfamiliar boot entered his field of vision and he braced himself for a painful kick. It never came. Oops. A low voice sighed. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to hit you that hard. Up you go. A large hand gripped him by the shoulder and hoisted him upright. It didn't belong to Kratos. Hey. He pushed at them and stumbled back. Let me go. All right, no need to squawk. When he finally found his footing, someone was waiting for him. A great big barrel-chested man, large and strong, clad in a dark cloak, the hood drawn back to reveal his face. His was a mighty visage rimmed by dark hair and a bristling beard. A shiver shot down his spine. Fuck me, kept me waiting. The big brute rumbled. Might not be able to sense you, but the big snake's kinda hard to miss. An angry hiss reached his ears. He could see the world serpent rising behind him, but slowly, too slowly. Kratos finally found his feet and called his axe to one hand, anger burning in his eyes. Who are you? Don't care about you too. Thor jerked his head to the side. Want a word with the boy here. Won't take long. Naruto and Atreus exchanged a baffled look. Not you. The brute waved a hand at Atreus. You. Kratos stepped forward. We have no quarrel with you. Let us pass. Too bad. Hey, old man. Catch. The bearded brute swung his hand. A wild blur of lightning and metal burst from his belt with impossible speed, struck Kratos in the chest and launched him into the world serpent. Both went flying into the lake. All this in an instant. There was no time to blink, much less react. Your turn, boy. Naruto flung himself in front of Atreus. No time to do anything but raise his right hand. Something large and heavy landed in his grasp, causing him to stagger. He'd caught a hammer, not just any hammer. A large hammer with a short handle, a weapon so heavy it dragged his arms right down to the ground. Realization dawned. An old memory surfaced, a foggy recollection. He'd seen a weapon like this once before, bathed in blood. Even if he hadn't, he still would know that hammer in his grasp. Anyone worth their salt did, because everyone knew the stories. He was looking at Aesir god, but not just any god. Oh, bugger. Thor, god of thunder, grinned down at him. It was not a nice smile. You were the one. Quick as a flash, he snapped his fingers and the hammer shot back out his grasp to land in a waiting hand. You were pretty easy to find. Shouldn't have picked at the mark on your neck, kid. A brutal roundhouse smashed into his face, driving him down to a knee. Atreus surged forward, knife in hand. Leave him alone. Dread in Naruto's herd mounted. Father could take a hit from Mjolnir. His brother couldn't. He flung out an arm. Stay back. Atreus faltered. He saw the pain in his brother's eyes. The confusion. Then he didn't see anything at all, because Thor stepped in and swung. Naruto raised his shield for all the good it did. The hammer smashed through his guard, hit him square in the chin and turned his world white as driven snow. He sent him hurtling into the sky. Clouds flashed by. In the distance, he heard Father's roar and then a grunt of pain that could only belong to Thor. Then that, too, was gone. All the world blurred around him. He hurtled through the clouds and crashed down, somewhere else. The boy was dead. Even now Kratos saw his son's demise unfold in his mind's eye, replaying over and over again in an endless loop. He had no one but himself to blame. It was all his fault. Chest aching from that powerful blow, he'd nevertheless dragged himself back onto the platform to face this unexpected enemy. He immediately wished he hadn't, because the moment he did, he saw his boy fling himself before Atreus to protect him. Watched, unable to move, as that hammer struck his boy in the chin with an awful crack. Then both boy and hammer were gone, hurtling away into the clouds. They reappeared on the horizon a moment later and struck the mountain, the very same destination Atreus had pointed out only moments ago. Seen from afar, Kratos heard the impact, felt it even from this distance, rattling his very bones. He himself would be hard-pressed to survive a fall like that. The boy was hardy to be sure, but there could be no doubting the result. It would be a miracle if he still lived. Kratos no longer believed in miracles. Faye had been his one and only miracle. She was gone now, and now so was another of his children. Ah, shit. The big bearded brute who had taken him scratched his head and turned toward the mountain, watching idly as a lone bird glided toward it. Guess I got too excited. Didn't mean to hit the little turd that far away. Kratos twitched. Atreus clambered to his feet. Murderer, Thor grunted, looking a little chagrined, as though he'd knocked over a flagon of ale. He is probably not dead. Ain't nothing personal. He waved a beefy hand their way, unaware of their mounting ire. I don't give a shit about the two of you. Hell, I don't even know who you are. Those words were the spark that ignited Kratos. Anger beyond anger, rage beyond rage, fury boiling in his veins beyond anything he'd ever felt. Kratos did not scream. He did not howl. The noise he made went beyond that. He roared, and in roaring, he moved. Clenched knuckles barreled into Thor's jaw, snapping the Aesir god's head to the right with an audible crack before he could even comprehend the danger. A bloody tooth whistled away into the lake. Irrelevant. Kratos rode the force of the blow and hammered a boot into the brute's belly, snarling now as the oaf stumbled back with a startled gurgle. Said gurgle became a grunt of pain as the Spartan called Faye's axe to his hand and chambered a vicious swing into his lower torso. Cold steel bit deep into godly guts. Not deep enough. A swing like that would have cut Zeus himself in half. Thor tore himself free with a grunt and stumbled back, rubbing at his bloody belly. He'd barely cut him. Kratos knew the look of a fearful man. There was no fear in the god of thunder. Surprise perhaps, but not fear, no even anger. A look of wild delight flashed across his bearded visage, bloodlust incarnate. The fuck was that? Thor barked a laugh. I thought you were just some old man, that the kid was the real prize. But you're not, are you? You're too much talk. Not enough blood. Not enough dying. Open palms crashed down on either sides of his head, deafening him. He reeled. A hand rose, trying to call his hammer. Kratos tore it down and flung him across the temple. Atreus was saying something. He could not hear him, could not see him. There was only the oaf before him. An oaf who was grinning now, absolutely grinning from ear to ear. You seem like a calm and reasonable person. He beckoned his way. Are you a calm and reasonable person? Kratos only snarled. Didn't think so. Thor cackled. Me neither. Overhead, the world serpent hissed, casting them in its shadow. No, Kratos snarled at it. He is mine. Huh. Thor used the distraction to barrel into him, forcing a grapple. The kid was special to you, huh? Don't worry. We'll take real good care of him. A red mist fell over Kratos' vision and he no longer heard any words. He was incapable of thought. There was only the rage. The monster awoke. Freya wanted to scream. Fool of a boy. What was he thinking, standing up to Thor? She beat her wings furiously and hurtled toward the mountain. Naruto's thoughts rushed back in fits and spurts. First, his chest ached something terrible. Second, why was the ground so cold? Third, he knew he must have blacked out however briefly, because now that he'd come to, he found himself chilly. downright freezing, really. His fur coat was ripped and torn, matted with blood, exposing his shoulders to the elements. His entire body shuddered and shook as he tried to breathe, managing only a faint rasp of air. He soon realized why. A thin plume of steam left his lips and he tried to rise, only to discover a certain hammer currently crushing his chest to the ground. A very familiar hammer. Memories rushed back, and with them, a painful realization. Lungs, air, breathe, needed to breathe. Heaving, he got a hand under it and pushed. It didn't budge. Blue eyes boiled red, his pupils going slitted as his world darkened. Move. A hollow rasp tore out of him and he shoved the bulky weight of Mjolnir aside, leaving it to splinter the stone in its wake. Air flooded his lungs and he rolled over with a rasp, spitting down into the snowy stones. Wait, snow, stone. He craned his neck and saw the blood at his feet. There was an awful lot of blood. Was it really his? How was he still alive? Standing was another mistake. The moment he tried, he lost his lunch, what little he'd eaten in Freya's hut beforehand. A hand speared out to steady himself to no avail. Everything was reeling. He felt sick. It wasn't just his body, the air was thin here. Wherever here was, his world reeled around him like a ship caught in a storm, and it took him the better part of 10 seconds to master himself. Even then he didn't dare trust his legs for fear of falling. Get up, damn it. He smacked his face twice. The pain centered him. There's work to be done. You survived, a woman's voice crooned behind him. Interesting. It seems death truly cannot hold those with purpose after all. Ironic, given your origins. He looked up and realized he wasn't alone as he'd thought. A slender lady in green gazed down at him from on high, her eyes glowing gold. He tilted his head to regard her and she lifted her chin, smiling at him as though he were an interesting pet or some such. Strange. He could almost see through her. Stranger still, he didn't sense any hostile intent from her. What was she? On a whim, he asked as much. Who are you? Your savior. Her lips curled in a sardonic smile. You live because of me. I expended a substantial portion of my remaining power to save your life. As such, you are in my debt. His brow furrowed. Why? Because I have plans for you. Rise, child. Her voice was curt, commanding as she beckoned to it. This is neither the time nor the place to dally. Rise and face your doom. Or fall to it. The choice is yours. More riddles. Naruto gripped his skull and closed his eyes. Get out of my head. He heard the ethereal specter tut softly, reminding him of a parent admonishing their child. I am not in your head, boy, any more than Hestia was. Hestia, the woman he'd seen in the flames. Be grateful I saved you. There will not be a second time. When he opened them again, he found the specter already gone, leaving him to wonder if he'd imagined seeing her at all. A thread of breath caressed his ear, rooting him where he stood. You shall know me as Athena, the one true goddess. We will meet again. Naruto shook off a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the cold. That name, he'd heard Kratos mutter it once while he slept. Hearing it again now filled him with an awful foreboding. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. He knew that. Where am I? The cursory glance confirmed his worst fears. When he looked around, he found only mountains looming around him. No lake, no temple, just snow and rock and a strange gate of some sort. Home. Where was home? Where were Kratos and Atreus? Were they safe? Were they all right? His pulse quickened in his ears, a steady staccato beat pounding faster and faster as he failed to find them. A raven croaked on a stone nearby. He gave it a nasty look, but the bird didn't budge. Thor, Kratos and Atreus were still with Thor, his eyes fixed on Mjolnir, still silent and inert at his feet. This is all your fault. He drove a crushing kick into the mighty hammer and regretted it as his foot howled in pain. But only briefly. Anger had him driving his heel against it again. Everything was great. Another kick, another spasm, another echo from the hammer. Why did you have to interfere? Kicking that thing won't make you feel better, brother. A sober voice chimed behind him. It'll only bring you pain. Naruto pivoted in place, blinked several times now, scrubbed at his eyes now, all for naught. Horned man trapped in a tree. Why was there a horned man in a tree? And why did he only have one eye? Ah, I get it. Said I fell upon Thor's hammer, still inert against the ground. Fighting that fat dauber were you? His bearded visage twitched in a faint smile. Bit reckless, but you're still alive, so I suppose that counts for something. Naruto glared back over his shoulder at the misty peak, still no sign of his family. No way he was getting back to them anytime soon. Was Thor not going to chase him? Mjolnir remained rooted where it was, which suggested he'd not had the time to call it back to him. That was a good thing, right? It meant he was fighting. Father would beat him. He had to beat him. No, he would beat him. No one could beat Kratos. Nobody. It just couldn't be done. So, his strange acquaintance hummed, drawing him out of his maudlin thoughts. What brings you all the way up here? Don't think about it. He didn't want to think about it. Distract himself. Now, he turned to face the strange man. And you are. Me. The horned man almost sounded offended by his apparently appalling lack of recognition. Don't you know? Why, I'm the greatest ambassador to the gods, the giants and all the creatures of the Nine Realms. I know every corner of these lands, every language spoken, every war waged, every deal struck. Naruto tilted his head. You're also stuck in a tree. Oi, now, lad. The older man huffed. I didn't interrupt your introduction. Let me finish mine before you go ripping into me. I really didn't introduce myself. Semantics. A rueful smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The brief bit of levity lightened his soul, heavy thought it was. As you were, then. Many thanks. The poor fellow puffed himself up as best he could despite the roots entombing him. Now where was I? Ahoy. They call me Mimi, smartest man alive, and I have the answer to your every question. Curiosity reared its ugly head and temptation with it. All right, he thumbed his chin. Why did Thor attack and separate us? Oh. Mimir blinked his one eye. Paused. No. Okay, there are a few gaps in my knowledge. Odin's had me imprisoned here for ... Oh, let's see. 109 winters. He mumbled to himself. I'm a clever lad, I can piece it together, I promise. Just ... give me some time. Another glance to Mjolnir, and the black bruise on his exposed chest. The fat dauber smacked you good, didn't he? That's how you landed here. A glum nod. My condolences. He's a right bastard, isn't he? Naruto knew the change of subject for what it was and shrugged. How do I get back to the lake? That's quite the journey there, brother. In a hurry to be somewhere. Our mother is dead. He saw no point in hiding it. She wanted us to spread her ashes from the highest peak in the realms. Another look about had him grimacing. This certainly looked like the mountain he'd seen from afar. Though I got here a bit early, seeing his father still has her ashes. Mimir winced. Oh, that didn't sound good. Oh, what? I'm afraid you're thinking of the wrong place, little brother. He granted him a rueful grimace when he squawked. The highest peak in the realms is not here in Midgard. It's in Jotunheim, realm of the giants. His heart hitched. That can't be right. It couldn't be, surely. Jotunheim. That implied unpleasant things. Mom was ... Well, Mom. He'd not pried into her past any more than she had his. Don't believe me. Take a look. Mimir's good eye glowed gold and cast, illuminating a bridge and beyond it a peak taller than any other. That there is the last known bridge to Jotunheim in all the realms. See that big mountain? Looks like a giant finger scraping the sky. That's the highest peak in all the realms. Not here. When he didn't respond, he barreled on. You'll need a bifrost filled with the light of Ulfheim to access it, and a secret rune. If it still exists, only a giant would know it. His face fell. Why couldn't the journey be simple? And all of them left a long time ago. True, Mimir chortled, but today the winds of fate have kicked up a strange vortex of coincidence. Fact is, there's only one person alive who can get you where you need to go ... And luckily for you, a certain fat dauber sent you right to my doorstep. My schedule's wide open. His brow furrowed. So you're saying we should go to Jotunheim? It's your best and only move from a tactical standpoint. Mimir retorted, much to his chagrin. It's the one place your enemies won't follow. Baldur. He growled the word. He hadn't seen that lunatic since he'd killed him. Theirs was a reunion he wasn't looking forward to. Understanding flashed across the horned man's face. Odin's best tracker. Let the mad bastard have you. He rubbed his neck, still having the bruise to prove it. Fought him once already. Mimir barked a laugh. And you're still alive. If memory served, and his still did, Freya was Baldur's mother. He'd read the stories, lived them firsthand. A man blessed with invulnerability to all threats physical or magical. Yet for all that he'd hurt him, several times, that invulnerability had held, but he'd punched through it on occasion. If that lunatic truly was Freya's boy, he had no desire to kill him. A mother should never have to suffer the death of a child. Didn't mean he wasn't above binding him to something if he got a chance. Him to a. Mostly. What about Thor? He might be a bit of a problem. But you seem like a capable lad. If your family's anything like you, I'm sure you'll manage. All right. Kratos was probably pounding Thor into a pulp right now. No way he'd lose. Atreus knew better than to get involved in a fight like that, surely. Still, his head was spinning from all this. So many revelations in so short a time threatened to unman him entirely. It took a fair bit of focus to calm himself once more. He couldn't afford to dally here. Long journey or no, he needed to get back to his family. Closing his heart to the fear, he faced Mimir once more. What do I need to do? First you need to cut off my head. Come again. It's simple. Odin made sure that no weapon, not even Thor's hammer, the old sage jerked his head to the still inert hammer not a yard away, could free my body from these bonds. Naruto stepped in and gave one such root a tug. It held. He could break boulders and cut clouds, but for all his strength it didn't budge. His fingers bit deep, but the tree held. Maybe if he uprooted it. No, that wouldn't work. The ground held when he tried to punch it, and the tree even more so. Its roots were far too deep. Finally, Mimir had enough. Whatever you're thinking, lad, don't. I'd prefer to keep what bits I have left. Then how can I take your head with me? Fortunately for you, you don't need my body. Just my head. Like I said, he twitched his good hand, still bound by roots. The trick is, we need to find someone who can reanimate my head using the old magic. Magic? His mouth twitched. I may know someone. A witch, a goddess. His tongue betrayed him. Her name is Freya. Mimir choked on his own spit. Freya. Oh no, lad. No. Find someone else. Anyone else. There is no one else. He raised his voice when the sage tried to protest again. Whatever your quarrel is with her, we're on decent terms. She'll help if I ask. Not the Freya I know. She's like to grind me into a pulp. He lifted his chin. She won't. You have my word. You seem awfully keen on her. Quick to defend her, too. Wait. Mimir blinked. Looked at him. His eyes bulged. Don't tell me you're sweet on her. Naruto clapped a hand over his mouth. SHHH. Not another word. Mimir's laughter was muffled against his palm. It didn't stop until he pinched his nose. Eck. His laughter cut off with a squawk. All right. Not like I have anything to lose at this point. She might do. Worth a try, if nothing else. The lack of levity wasn't lost on him. If she fails, you'll die. That might be preferable. A haunted look loomed in Mimir's good eye. It tortures me, you know. Every day, brother. Odin himself sees to it personally, and believe me, there is no end to his creativity. Every single day. His head bobbed with the weight of each word. This ain't living. It's agony. And just like that he found himself motivated. I don't have anything to cut with. I'll have to use my hands. Or, he tried to lift Mjolnir. It didn't budge. No dice there. Whatever gift of strength he'd experienced prior, it wasn't with him now. He struggled with it a minute longer, red-faced and puffing, even managed to lift it an inch off the ground. Probably best not to use it anyway, Mimir offered a nervous laugh. You might smash my skull as soon as free me, and then where would we be? Fair point. Naruto dropped the hammer, stepped to him and laid hands on his head. You may want to close your eyes. A low peal of thunder rumbled in the distance. Naruto swore. No, not now. He was still watching the clouds darken overhead, still trying to tear Mimir's head free when Mjolnir leaped off the ground behind him. It became intimate with his face. His nose bent horribly, breaking beneath the force, then he was flying, face skidding across the ground. A hand closed around the back of his head and forced him down as he slid, tearing a deeper furrow in the stone to pummel him into the ground. Cheeky little shit. A familiar gravelly voice growled over the ringing in his ears. You don't touch a man's hammer. The ground splintered under clawed hands and he kicked backward like a mule. A pain grunt reached him, then the pressure pinning him eased. The moment it did, he flung himself forward and raised his shield for the onslaught to come. No attack came. Thor glared back at him covered in wounds, the most prominent being an ugly slice in his belly that even now wept blood. He looked like he'd just come from the fight of his life. His right side was burned, while his left arm hung useless at his side. Someone had given him a black eye, and he'd lost 2 fingers besides. Yet for all that, he was still standing. You have any idea how annoying that was? As he looked on, the god of thunder set a hand his shoulder, bared his teeth in a bloody snarl, and popped it back in. I was enjoying that fight with your old man, then you went and tried to lift my hammer, and I had to fly over here. A snap of his fingers and Mjolnir flew into his grasp once more. There are some lines you just don't cross, kid. An agonized noise pierced the pair. It took Naruto a moment to realize it had come from his lips. If you hurt him, relax, he's alive. Pissed to all hell and hollering his head off, but he was still breathing when I flew off. Naruto reached up, grabbed his nose, and wrenched it back into place. Send me back to my father. Your father? Huh. He boomed a laugh. That's rich. He ain't your daddy. His eyes clouded. He is in every way that matters. Heh. Thor didn't rise to the bait, he only smiled. You'll see. He wanted to kill him. To reach inside that belly wound and have his guts for garters. He longed to rip and tear this monster, this destroyer who dared strike at his family. But fighting him now served only himself. He had his objective, and however much Thor might call him, he wasn't it. Kratos and Atreus needed him. Vengeance did not. Hit Mimir's head and move on. Is what I'd like to do, he grimaced. But he isn't going to stand by and let me do that, is he? He tried bolting past him anyway. Maybe if he moved quick enough, the big bugger wouldn't be quick enough. A hand closed around his shoulder, reeling him. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, boy. Thor yanked him backwards. The world blurred and his back crashed into Mimir's tree. Leave the lad alone, Thor. The old sage tried to help the only way he could, vocally. I'm the one you want. Mjolnir cracked across his face, snapping his head to the side. Quiet, you. Mimir spat blood. Daft bugger. Sorry lad, I tried. Thor paid him no heed. Those cold blue eyes fell on his weapons. Or rather, the lack thereof. Spears still broken? Huh. Where's your sword? Naruto righted himself with a groan. Why would I have a sword? Something darkened in the god of thunder's eyes. Pity. Thor was on him a moment later. Pride had him trying to block. That same pride left sent him sprawling with a dented shield. The very moment he found his feet, Mjolnir filled his vision. He evaded it by the narrowest of margins, felt the crackle of lightning sear his hair, then struck back, bashing the golden shield in his face. Once, twice, thrice now. Bastard didn't even flinch. On the 4th he caught his arm and wrenched his wrist out place. Is that it? I expected more. Mjolnir raced in and brained him. Stars, whole galaxies, burst before his vision. He felt his eyes go red and reeled himself back. No, stay in control. What are you doing? Let me out. You'll die. His skull ached. Then I'll die in control. Idiot. Come on. No way did Baldur get his shit tossed like this. He heard something crack as Mjolnir smacked aside his shield again and hammered his ribs. Stop holding back. Naruto jabbed a fist into Thor's belly wound. A backhanded slap sent him spinning to the floor. Better, but not good enough. A boot stomped down at his head, forcing him to catch it with both hands or be crushed. Maybe I'll leave you here and pay Daddy Dearest another visit. Thor pushed down, eyes sparking a wild, bloodlusted blue. See how sturdy your baby brother's spine is while I'm at it. Might even pay that Valkyrie bitch of yours a visit. All the world went red. You keep them out of this. Then show me who you really are. Naruto shoved him off and slashed a hand through the air. Clawed fingers raked across Thor's exposed gut, adding a fresh wound to the one Kratos had inflicted. He stormed in and struck, tanked a hit on his shield and tried to sweep Thor's legs. It was like kicking a tree. He didn't budge. A gravelly laugh rose in his ears. Njolnir hurtled at his head. He caught it in both hands. The stakes were made. He'd forgotten just how heavy it was. Trying to hold it back was akin to catching a mountain. So heavy, too heavy. In an instant he was driven to a knee. Sparks skittered down the hammer and into his hands, leaving his fingers aching, then plain numb. But he couldn't stop. To let go now was to have his head caved in sure as shit. Listen, boy. Thor leered down at him. I'll tell you what I told your old man. Give me everything you have. He could smell meat on the man's breath, strong enough to make his eyes water. I know what you are. We both do. Show me the monster inside. Njolnir broke the deadlock, slammed forward, bashing him in the skull with a heavy broadside. Blood stained his vision. Then came steel. A single blow ended it. His world went black as he fell flat on his back. It felt like he was standing on the edge of a great cliff, peering into the abyss. And the abyss stared back. Let go. His mind teetered on the edge. Just let go. That last tiny thread holding him back snapped. Let go of everything. All around him, the ground began to crumble in his mind. He saw a distant specter of fire and ice in his mind's eye, and beyond them, a great fox trapped within a cage. He knew him, didn't he? He took a step towards it, so tired. His eyes felt heavy. It would be so nice to just rest. Oh ho, no. Thor's voice pierced the darkness, gloating even in his death. You don't get to go yet. It's over when I say it's over. Pain. Lightning raced through his chest, jolting him back to the waking world. He immediately wished it hadn't. The moment he jolted upright, Thor was on him again. His shield rose. The god of thunder wailed on it in recompense for his temerity. Again and again and again until the poor thing finally breathed its last and shattered. Blocking without a shield only made it worse. He broke both his wrist and collarbone. Get up. Another sparking hammer blow rocked his world before he could even process the pain, turning everything black and gray. I'm not leaving until I see the real you. His head snapped back beneath another blow, spitting blood. What's wrong? Still the onslaught continued. You think you can burn everything, latch onto a new family, get a clean slate. A tooth whistled free as he decked him across the face. That ain't how it works. We both know you're not some weakling. You're better than that. A kick launched him away, only for a hand to catch his ankle and sent him slamming down onto his back. Naruto's body could only take so much. This time, it broke. His spine snapped. Limbs went limp. In shock, he fell. And still, Thor did not relent. Get up. Hateful blue eyes glared his way. I can't, you bastard. He really couldn't. Thor seemed to realize that a moment later, because he waded back in. You can't even move anymore, can you? He heaved a sigh, unaware of what he'd done. Damn it. Guess you hit your limit. Can't bear looking at you like this. Probably best to kill you anyway. Merciful, really. Njolnir swung down to end his life. The raven suddenly shrieked from its stone perch. Thor froze, rounded on it with a snarl. Why do you mean? No. Naruto snapped. There could be no other word for it. He couldn't die here. He absolutely could not. Anger overpowered his fear. And so, let go. His wounds closed. Bones set themselves. His spine mended. A burning clawed hand snaked upright, caught Thor's wrist and squeezed. It means no. Golden red eyes gleamed up at him. And I've had enough. Confused flashed through the bearded beaver's face. The hell are you on about, Werg? His words warped into a grunt as he drove an ungodly uppercut into his chin. He flipped back, arse over elbows. He was still tumbling when a kick caught his throat and launched him clear off the peak. Down the mountain he went, flopping through the snow a short distance before finally hitting a boulder that held his weight. Njolnir struck the ground at Naruto's feet with a sonorous clang. Savage scarlet slits fastened upon it. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. Kill him. A deep, dark voice inside him exulted. Take that hammer and bash his brains in. He reached down for Thor's prized weapon, grasped its haft in hand. It was just as large as before. Yet something had changed. Its weight seemed so much lesser now. Heavy to be sure, but not so much an impediment as an annoyance. Or perhaps he knew how to hold it. Maybe he'd always known. It came free from the snow and rock with a sullen grumble, inch by angry inch, until finally, he hoisted it over his shoulder. Mimir whistled a ways behind him. Well, that's not something you see every day. Naruto hissed. Quiet, tree god. Look, lad, I'm really not. A dark look quelled him. Shutting up now. Naruto glared back at the hammer in his grasp. He could feel it fighting him, trying to break free and return to Thor. Almost as though it were alive, rejecting him. For some reason that made him even angrier. Here he was holding possibly the most powerful weapon in all the realms, and the damn hammer wanted to sulk. You don't want me to wield you. Tough. Pivoting on one heel he flung it at Thor's prone form. The portly man saw it coming and ducked with a speed bellying his girth. The boulder behind him burst as he dodged the fatal blow. Not so Naruto. Clawed fingers found his throat. He whirled and leaped back to Mimi's peak, smashing the larger man down with all the fury of a raging inferno. Thor buckled beneath him. His right hand grasped at his, trying to pry his palms free. The left rose and snapped his fingers. Njolnir raced into to bash him on the back of his head. He shrugged it off and flung Thor away. Even as the burly brute fell, he reached around and got a hold of the hammer once more. A little fight in ya, eh? I like it. A roundhouse smashed him away. Then you're gonna love me, lad. Mimir's voice broke through his haze. Calm down. You're on fire. Literally. Naruto glanced down at his hands, smoldering now with fiery wrath. It didn't hurt. On the contrary, he felt good, energized, strong in a way he'd been before. Complete. Whole. Raw red sparks crackled at the edge of his vision, glimmering at the edges. His rage locked down on the burly brute before him and all the world faded away. Thor must have seen the look in his eye too, because he brandished Mjolnir and granted him a bloody grin. There he is. Mjolnir swayed in his grasp as he staggered to his feet. Remember this feeling. Remember what you are. Naruto's temper flickered like a windswept candle. What? Not important. Thor only grinned at him. You'll figure it out. Fight now, talk later. I don't understand. You will. I can see it in your eyes. The hammer hurtled after him, flung with intent to bash his skull in. You're a destroyer. Like me. A clawed hand caught the hammer. Red eyes narrowed. I know. The hammer was still heavy. Terribly so. Yet here in this instant, he could still hold it back. He'd always known, hadn't he? His foe only laughed and recalled the hammer back into his waiting palm. There he is. That's my boy. Now fight like you mean it. Scarlet light swelled around him. I quotel I'll kill you. With an attitude like that, you just might. Naruto lunged. What followed couldn't be called a fight. Fights had rules. This was a brawl. They raged back and forth like Aesir gods of old, ripping and tearing. Blood stained the snow time and time again until it was all he could see and feel. Time stretched on into eternity as they tore one another apart. For every hit one took, the other gave just as good. But all good things must come to an end. Fire and light collided in a maelstrom of death one final time. Thor barreled in and swung for the fences. Naruto raised his shield arm, braced himself for the blow and punched with the other. Lightning flashed. Searing red pain. He cried out and jerked back, arm hanging limp at his side. But the deed was done, and Mjolnir had recoiled from the force of his punch, dragging Thor's arm up in his guard with it. And he still had one good arm. He screamed and struck with a thunderous punch, stabbing Thor in his wound and all but folding the thunder god over his fist. Blood splashed across his face, but the god of thunder only granted him a feral grin. My turn. Naruto realized his fatal error a moment later as a beefy hand burst through his chest. They'd impaled one another. I see now why Baldur had so much trouble with you. Thor leered down at him, bloody teeth bared. Even this lesser version of you. But I am not my brother. And your family. Heh. A wild look passed the length of his bearded visage. The Allfather's got plans for them. Clawed finger stabbed deeper into his gut, cutting him short. He coughed up blood. Then we'll kill him, too. Mjolnir swept in it at his blind side. It landed in an open palm. Naruto squeezed. Lightning licked at his fingers. Those clawed digits bit down and a piece came away, tearing Thor's weapon in two. A deep belly laugh was his reward, followed by a headbutt. He stumbled away, still clutching his prize. Thor teetered in the opposite direction, gripping his guts literally. In one hand, face gone pallid. Even so he laughed. That's him, boy. Gonna need a new hammer after this. Naruto lurched after him. He could feel the in his chest hole closing, but slowly. Far too slowly. Come back here. Not done with you yet. No, not his boy. Never his boy. He had to stop him here. Mjolnir was broken, but he was still alive. Had to finish him. Good fight, kid. Thor granted him a bloody grin once more. We'll call this one a draw. A swarm of ravens swept around him, dragging him away. They see ya now. Try not to die. Wait. Naruto stumbled after him, only for his fist to pass through open air. Then the birds were gone, and Thor with them. I'm not done with you, you fast bastard. He took a tottering step forward. I said wait. Only the echo of his own voice answered him. Rage bubbled up in him. He'd been so close. A scream built in his throat, but all that emerged was a low wheeze, a plume of steam in the thin air. He looked down and saw why, realized just where the hole in his chest was. Oh, Thor had hit a lung. No wonder he could barely breathe. Hopefully that wound would close. Wasn't sure if he could regrow a lung. Why didn't he go for my heart? He'd had a chance. He had seen it, but he hadn't. Why? If someone had broken his favorite weapon, he would have gone for the kill. Even now the fragment of Mjolnir tingled and sizzled in his hand, spitting stray sparks. It was not an insignificant portion. Brock might want to see it. The thought brought him some comfort. You all right there, brother? Naruto blinked. Mimir, right, Mimir. Mustn't forget Mimir. His dazed mind began to babble as the last of the red fire bled away from him. In its absence, the pain began to return. He took a faltering step forward. Another, a third, now. A sudden spasm seized his chest and he fell against the sage tree. He clutched at it, gasping until the pain faded. Feel awful. He used the roots to drag himself upright. Gonna cut off your head now. Hold still. The sage sputtered. In your shape. Maybe you should wait. I don't think I'll get another chance to do it. Mimi closed his eyes and bowed his head. Right then, do your worst. I'm ready. There will be pain. A tired chuckle answered him. Pain's an old friend. Naruto swept clawed hands forth, locked both hands round the man's head and pulled hard. Blood sprayed forth to spatter his face. Mimir's head hit floor. His knees followed suit a moment later and he knew his legs would hold him no more today. Even then, his hands managed to bind Mimir's head with a bit of cord and bind him to his belt. There, one step down. Only 9 to go. He fell onto his hands with a groan. His strength was fading. He could see the blood pooling beneath him. That ... wasn't good. Don't pass out. Can't pass out here. Darkness swarmed in despite his best efforts. His skull kissed cold stone. The last thing he heard was the distressed cry of a falcon, followed by the gentle touch of a familiar hand. This is a dream, isn't it? Naruto knew it had to be, that he must be dreaming, because several things were wrong with him. For one, he was healthy and whole, standing up, his armor long gone. Likewise, his weapons were nowhere to be seen at that, and he felt none of the crushing fatigue from his battle with Thor. He didn't know why. He wasn't sure he wanted to. His surroundings were another matter. Large trees loomed on either side of him, lush and green, rimmed by a gentle sunrise and the beginnings of winter's first snowfall. He could taste the bite of the cold to come when he inhaled, see a warm plume of steam when he exhaled, feel the frozen ground beneath his bare feet. Yes, he knew these woods well, because he was home. Son, his spine stiffened. Don't turn around. Mustn't turn around. He would see her if he did. And if he did, he would break. He just knew it. A shiver shuddered his shoulders. You're not real. He choked the words out. Leave me be. The world shook around them. Slim arms enfolded him from behind and pulled him backward into a warm embrace. He's found me. You shouldn't be here, not yet. Go back to you, father. She kissed the back of his forehead. Wake up. It wasn't a pleasant process. A stabbing pain, a sudden start, and his eyes were open. He could see again, feel hands on his chest, the hammering of his still beating heart, his own panicked breathing. He couldn't move his right side without utter agony. Looking down only confirmed his fears. He saw the bandages, felt the stitches beneath. Hurt. It hurt. Everything hurt. Calm down. A soft, familiar voice crooned in his ear. It's all right. You're all right. You've been badly hurt and your lungs are damaged. Lay still. Wait. He recognized that voice ... in this ceiling. Freya's house. How? He rasped, alarmed at the weakness of his own voice. How'd you get me down the mountain? Unless you can change into something bigger than a bird. If she could turn herself into a dragon, he might have to reevaluate their friendship. Dragons were awesome and all, but he didn't fancy his chances against one. Not as such. He spied a spark of magic out the corner as Freya worked. I'd help. Kinda doubt it was Mimir. He could see the man's head on the nearby table, still dead. Who, then? She fell silent. He wondered if she would answer. And then, finally, there was a man. Curiosity reared its ugly head. Father. No. He heard her rummage for herbs. Not him. He propped himself up on an elbow, only to curse as his body buckled. Where is this man? Gone. She swept back over, herbs in hand. He left soon after I stabilized you. Did he give you his name? Her lips firmed into a thin line and she dodged the question entirely. I'm going to spell you to sleep now. I need to clean your wounds. You don't want to be awake for this. He quivered at the idea, going back under after what he'd just seen. He didn't want to ... but he saw the necessity. Will I wake up? She gripped his head in her hands and touched her forehead to his. I will not let you die. Her spell touched his mind and he lowered his mental barriers, allowing it in. It felt like being swaddled in heavy fur blankets. Peaceful, comforting. That's nice. Wait. His eyes snapped open, fighting the spell. That head. Mimir. You need to revive him. We need his help. Freya made a face. You're certain? I am ... Oh geez, getting sleepy. Darkness swept in. Breathe. Kratos needed to breathe. Inhale. Exhale. In. Out. Easier said than done. The rage was out of its cage, and it had no desire to return. Even now he seethed with every step. He could have killed Thor. He knew he could. He should have killed him. He would have killed him if the fool hadn't fled toward the mountain. He itched to wrap his fingers around the man's throat and squeeze until his eyes burst from his head. But no, rage would not serve him here. Focus would. Discipline as well. He and Atreus had spent the better part of the day making their way up the mountain. It was slow going. Their wounds had healed but their spirits were battered. They'd encountered another strange dwarf, paused long enough to let him enhance the axe, then moved on. He could see strange black smoke billowing ahead, surging from a gap in the mountain. He hoped it would not impede their progress further. They could afford no delays. Father. Kratos shoved his anger back into its cage and locked it tight. What is it? I'm sorry. Atreus flinched when he glanced back at him. I couldn't do anything back there. I'm weak. The boy did not know his true nature. How could he? He had never been told of such a thing. He thought himself mortal. You are not weak. Yes, I am. A shout burst out of the boy as he balled both fists at his sides. You and Naruto fought gods. Gods? All I did was hide. Both times. Atreus was breaking. He could see it in his eyes, the slouch of his shoulders, the slowness of his steps. He knew the pain well. He must speak to him, say something, anything before he went mad. But he could not bring himself to tell him of his true nature. Not here. Not yet. And so he settled for a half measure. Look at me, boy. Atreus complied, just like his namesake. Father, I know your pain. Kratos knelt before him, laying a hand on his shoulder. I once had a brother too, just as you do. His name was Deimos. He was my younger sibling, taken when I was young. The boy perked up. I have an uncle. No, you've had an uncle. His face fell. Oh, the point I make is this, he said the words for his sake as much as the boy's own. Life is fickle. Think not of your brother's death, but of the time you spent with him. The memories, good and bad, They will sustain you until we find him. You think he's alive? He had to be. He must. It was a fool's hope, but it was all he had. Kratos turned away and traced his scarred stomach, running pale fingers over the injury there. An old wound where he had run himself through with the blade of Olympus nearly an eternity ago. He had died once before and survived. The boy might surprise him. We press on. Atreus shouldered his bow and nodded. Yes, sir. The harsh cry of a bird split the silence from on high. A falcon winged down from on high, landing roughly before them. As they looked on, it grew, shedding its wings and claws for an altogether softer form. The girl rose from her crouch, stumbled, caught herself on a rock. Righted herself, now. Saw them. Wait. You mustn't touch the black breath. Was that the name for this foul-smelling smoke that loomed ahead? More meddling. Now is not the time. Which? Your son lives. Kratos reeled back 1 foot. He felt the moment of weakness could be allowed, given what he'd just heard. Never had he needed something so badly and never known until he received it. Her words hit him hard, harder than the hammer of Thor. He was nearly undone then and there. Where? She faltered. He's very weak. I nearly wasn't able to move him. Where's the boy? He was dreaming again. For once, Naruto found it a peaceful one. Sleeping on a field of clouds, really, what could be better? Warrior. Shame it didn't last. Battered blue eyes creaked open. Yet another Valkyrie loomed over him. She couldn't be anything else. Not Ire, though. Not this one. Her armor reminded him of a vulture, all gold and red, yet her appearance was anything but. She seemed far more solid than her shield sister, corporeal somehow, wide hips and a full bosom easily visible beneath her armor. She crossed her arms over it now, and despite her frightening helm, he could almost hear the smile in her voice. Do you seek Valhalla? Her words were a low, resonant hum. Do you wish to enter the All-Father's hallowed halls? Odin. Merely the mention of the man had him gnashing his teeth all over again. Not really. She tilted her helmeted head. Why ever not? Do not all warriors seek such? He lifted his chin. Because his son nearly killed me. I see. Let us speak as equals, then. She tore her helmet free and flung it away. Lively violet eyes beamed back at him, framed by a lopsided grin and a wild mane of red hair. Our halls are vast and our food fine. You can drink and feast there to your heart's content. Thor himself would be heartened to have a warrior such as you by his side once more. Once more. Unbidden, he recalled the brute's words during their battle. That's Boy. Was he? No, no, no. Don't think about that. That was impossible. He recoiled and shook his head. I can't go there. Not yet. Very well. Much to his surprise, the Valkyrie didn't argue. You will join us sooner or later. It is only a matter of time. Battle is in your blood. Quick as a flash, she laid a hand on his head. Her powerful grip forced his head upright and her smile vanished, leaving him to wonder if it was an act to begin with. His eye is no longer upon me. Her voice intoned, go, now. Seek my sisters. Seek Sigrun. Reality rushed back. Blue eyes opened to a dull, aching pain in his chest. He knew this roof. Back at Freya's again. The room was dark, lit only by a faint fire in the hearth. A faint, almost earthy smell reached his nose. Charlie must have moved underground again. Understandable. Best to stay hidden from the sons of Odin. But where was? There you are. A familiar yet merry voice chimed just out of sight. Finally awake, are ya? Naruto palmed his face. Was having a dream ... or maybe a nightmare. Hence my bellowing. He knew that voice, didn't he? Mimir. He craned his neck, smiled a little when he found the man's head sitting on the table opposite his borrowed bed. Where's Freya? The head grinned at him. Your lovely lady. He flushed. She ain't mine, head. Went to fetch your doll. Bastard talked right over him. I suspect she'll be back shortly with him and the wee lad in tow. HRRM. His grunt would have made Kratos proud. I saw another Valkyrie in my sleep, one I didn't know. Oh? The decapitated sage perked up. What did she look like? He described her. Ah, yes. Mimir laughed. The sight of Gondal always took my breath away. She had a silver tongue, a sharp wit, and struck a figure so stunning, it literally drove men insane. Odin forbid her from setting foot in Midgard after a time. His insanity is not a welcome trait in Valhalla. Though, she's clearly stopped listening to him now. Clearly, Naruto chose to keep her final words close to his chest. And you seem rather chipper, given your circumstances. Aye, came the reply. Freya was kind enough to resurrect me at your request, despite her reservations. And you, still feel like death. He touched a hand to his injured side. His hand brushed the fragment of Mjolnir, crudely bound to his felt by a leather cord. Good. He still had it. Got this to show for it, though. Might show it to Brock when I get a chance. You rang. A sudden voice had them both jumping. Naruto swore a blue streak. Would there be no end to today's surprises? Brock. He balked, startled to find the very same blacksmith standing between him and Mimir's head. Where'd you come from? None of your business. He scowled, in no mood for such an excuse. I think it is, seeing as you weren't here a second ago and there ain't no way in here. Fine, fine, don't get your fuzzy head in a twist. The Azure Dwarf waved a hand. It's a little trick me and Entwit of a brother can use. Like I said, worry your fuzzy head about it. Fuzzy? Boy, my hair ain't that long. That's not important. The short smith snapped, cutting him off. That dude you got there. Let me have a look at her. Naruto gripped Mjolnir's fragment protectively, suddenly loath to part with it. You mean this? Yeah, give it here. Reluctantly, he did so. Huh. Brock all but yanked it out his grasp with a triumphant cackle and hefted it high. I knew it. You busted that bastard's hammer. Sindri's gonna have a cow. Hey, don't go running off with that. I earned the thing. Brock scoffed. You got rocks in your head. You know we made this here hammer, right? That was news to him. And oh. Well, we did. Despite his best efforts, Naruto found himself growing used to the dwarf's crude speech. I'll tell you the story sometime. Might even be able to make something with this. An idea dawned. Any chance you could fix my spear and shield? Sure, but not with this. Nah, gonna make something even better. Just you wait. Okay. Naruto lay back down with a pained grunt, somewhat mollified by his words. What are you gonna make with that? A hammer to end all hammers. Brock's grin was positively feral. Something to make Thor quake in his boots. We're gonna show that hairy arsehole with fur. Course, he paused, thumbing his chin as he considered the broken shard in his grasp. I'll probably need him brother for this. The door crashed open. Mimir sighed. Speaking of family, boy, Naruto heard Kratos and jolted upright on instinct alone. A spasm of pain forced him down with a shuddering gasp. When he looked back, Brock had vanished, leaving the broken piece of Mjolnir to clatter upon the floor. He reached for it, and to his surprise, the fragment leaped into his palm. Oh, that clever little bastard. Boy, Kratos saw him. Kratos rushed him. The boy flinched. Kratos slowed. The embrace that followed was given with the utmost restraint, if only for fear of hurting him. Atreus wriggled between them, and for once he didn't shy away from him. We thought you were dead. Almost was. The boy tried to laugh, only to gasp in pain. Twice, in fact. Atreus leaned past him, saw the fragment in his hand. Is that? It was. Kratos recognized the sparking shard, large as it was. Not the vengeance he had wished for, but it would do. He felt the ghost of a smile touch his face. The boy had battled Thor and lived to tell the tale. More than that, he'd forced a draw and claimed a piece of the oaf's hammer as a trophy. There could be no greater honor for a Spartan than to survive, to face a superior opponent, grow from the experience, and in doing so, live to fight another day. What was this feeling he felt? Was this pride? Was this what pride felt like? Pride not just in oneself, but one's children. It was a strangely humbling experience. Unfortunately, it was overshadowed by concern. Twice now his eldest son had met death. Twice he had survived. Twice now it had failed to take him. He was not sure there would be a third. Don't leave me like that again. Atreus clung tight to him. Not a chance. Kratos rumbled a sigh. We will not. How did you survive? The older boy grimaced. I nearly didn't. There was a woman. A woman, not the girl. Clearly, she looked just as interested. Who, boy? Much to his annoyance, the boy's face closed down. It's not important. I lived. That's what matters, right? The boy was keeping secrets, not telling him something. Ordinarily that would have made Kratos angry. It still did, in a sense. Furious even. He wanted to shake him, demand his answers. But the boy lived when he had thought him dead. It cooled his temper, if only for the moment. What would Faye say? You have secrets of your own, grumbles. Who we are is not who we were. Wise words. Words he wished to live by. But wishing was different than doing. He wished Faye were still alive. He wished his sons made sense. He wished he could master his rage, now that it had awoken again. Wishing would gain him nothing. And there was work to be done. Can you stand? Freya bridled. No. Naruto spoke over her. Yes. Then we are leaving, boy. Gather your things. The summit awaits. Sure, he sat up. I'll be rightich. He doubled over, clutching his wound. The scream that followed was too painful to be faked. The sound rent his heart in two. His hands came away bloody. All hell broke loose. Boy, brother, blast it. He's opened his wound again. The girl pushed the blonde back down, mumbling a numbing spell under her breath. I told you, he's in no shape to travel. Wait. Naruto held up a hand before the girl could try and spell him back to sleep. Speaking of traveling, there's something you gotta know. He told them his tale, quickly, in succinct terms. Kratos found himself balked at the end of it. That cannot be what she meant. The girl wasn't having it, either. Whatever she meant, I forbid it. You're not going anywhere until you recover. Aye, she's got the right of it, a new voice chimed. Kids barely holding together. Kratos looked down, blinked hard. What devilry was this? Atreus squinted. Is that a talking head? Pleased to meet you too, laddie. The younger boy laughed. Huh, neat. Kratos rumbled a warning in turn. Quiet, head. Ah, and you must be their said I didn't flinch in the face of his ire. Friendly fellow, aren't you? Listen, your son needs time to heal. He took a heavy wound, even for him. Let him rest. Mimir, be nice. Naruto made a distressed noise. And I'll be fine. His wide-eyed look struck Kratos. He could see the whites of his eyes bulging, the fear in them. He didn't want to be left behind. Anyone could see that. The girl tutted. Could you not wait a day or two? Or is your journey so pressing you would abandon your son? Could they? It felt like they'd gone from one battle to the next without rest. First the stranger Baldur, at their doorstep, then the Draugr and the Reavers, then more Draugr still. And now Thor himself. Would the sons of Odin never let them be? He knew not what they wanted with the boys his boys. But they would not of him. Not while he still drew breath. Yet to wait. One day. Naruto perked up. The hope in his eyes was almost painful to behold. You'll wait. We will. Atreus seemed torn, caught between duty and impatience. Kratos felt much the same. Yes, you will. The girl looked far too smug for his liking. Far too smug indeed. How kind of you to see reason. HRMPH. Must not get angry. He owed this girl yet another debt. Her smile didn't waver. You're welcome. Mimir chortled softly to himself. I'd expect no less of you, Freya. Even weakened, your tongue's sharp as ever. Atreus balked. Kratos stiffened. Naruto slapped a hand to his forehead. The girl sighed. Thank you ever so much for that, Mimir. Freya. Much to Kratos' chagrin, Atreus recovered first. The goddess Freya. You didn't know. Mimir laughed sheepishly. Sorry. The boy knew, so I simply assumed. Naruto all but groaned into his palms. Smartest man alive, my ass. They would have words about that. But for now. Kratos glared at the girl, no, at Freya. You are a god. She dodged the question like the warrior she no longer was and busied herself with more herbs. When word gets out that Mimir is free, and what you've done to Thor's hammer, the wrath of Odin won't be far behind. I hope you've prepared yourselves. You did not answer my question. What would you have me say? I was the leader of the Vanir once, yes, but no longer. She raised her little arms, scowling loathsomely at herself. Not like this. A grow built in his throat. You did not think it important to tell me. She stepped closer, glaring up at him. Are you really going to lecture me about that? Kratos wanted to fall back into his own ways. This distressed her, but she had aided him twice now. First with her protection stave and now by aiding his family. If she weren't a god he would have considered her a good match for the boy. She still might someday, should she prove herself trustworthy. He longed to storm out and leave, but he could not. To do so would mean leaving the boy here with her, alone. See, Faye's voice didn't feel imagined this time. You can be a good father after all. Her words were so close, her presence so strong now that he could almost imagine her standing behind him, a guiding hand on his shoulder. Go easy on them, grumbles. He felt a tiny spark of something on his arm and whirled. Faye, his boys looked to him. Father, did you say something? Kratos shook his head. Nothing. He was tired. We will rest. Naruto watched the fire fade. Flame burned low in the heart as the last of the logs gave up their light, casting flickering shadows about Freya's abode. He marveled at it, a little. Fire had always appealed to him. To see it burning so low now, like his spirits. Well, it set him ill at ease. Heat was something of a constant for him. He gravitated toward it almost as much as he did the cold. The thought made him shiver a little. Laying in bed, lost in thoughts all alone. There could be no crueler fate. Kratos and Atreus would sleep outside while Mimir, being undead, would keep watch from the latter's belt. Freya didn't trust his body enough to let him join them tonight, and so he lay in her bed while she slept outside with the others. Sleep didn't come easily. Not to him. It seldom did. Tonight he feared what dreams might come, the monsters that may or may not be in his head. The fire flickered in the hearth. He kept watching it. One of the logs split with a sharp crack. No one stirred. Why would they? They were all outside, guarding him. Made him feel helpless, it did. If only he would heal faster. If only his body hadn't been pushed to its limits and beyond. If only. I'm not gonna get anywhere like this, damn it. He heaved a growl. If sleeping is the only thing I can do. Naruto sighed, closed his eyes and tried to roll over. A warm hand touched his head. Your thoughts are troubled as ever, I see. His eyes snapped open. Not Freya. Definitely not Freya. For a wild, inexplicable moment he thought it might be that Athena woman come to torment him. But no, the hand was coated in gentle fire and she was altogether more solid. He recognized the dark eyes and flaming air around her, matching her wild hair. His pulse slowed. It's you again. Hestia, right. The burning goddess smiled at him just as she had from Mother's pyre. You've remembered my name. You honor me. She'd come from the hearth fire, he realized. Of course I do. Hard to forget your last appearance. She studied him for a long moment. Your feelings betray you. You miss your mother. Low blow, that. And an awful reminder of what they'd lost. I do. We all do. Her smile shrank a little. You needn't mourn. She is still with you. What in blazes did that mean? Spare me the word games. You will understand when the time is right. A pause now, as she seemed to consider her words. And a warning, young Naruto. You should stay away from Ofheim. He set his jaw with a scowl. You can't honestly expect me to sit this one out. Then do not enter its light. You will not like what you find there. His soul shivered with ice and fire. What do you know? Her face closed down. More than I should, less than I wish. Ugh, he sneered. Gods and their riddles. Be quick with your words. It is not a riddle. It is the truth. I am unable to speak of it further. She will not let me. Here. She laid a hand on his head. A blessing from the goddess of the hearth. Smooth fingertips stroked his scalp, bringing with them a pleasant numbness. May you enjoy a peaceful dreamless slumber and wake fully rested come morning. She kissed her fingers atop his forehead. His mind went under. Sleep well. Atreus did not sleep well that night. Resting outside was all well and good. He'd done that before with Mother on occasion, but tonight was different. Tonight his dreams were fitful and furtive, filled with pain and loss so poignant it made the poor boy whimper in his sleep. Dark specters haunted his every step, bitter memories of his own powerlessness, his weakness, tormenting him in a fog of uncertainty and ugly doubt. And with them came the voices. They were the worst of it by far. They belittled him at every turn, demeaned him, humiliated him. Weak, useless, not like father ... or your brother. He tried to shake them off, tried to flee from them in his dreams, to no avail. Quite suddenly the haze cleared. In place of the once daunting darkness in which he'd been trapped, he now found himself somewhere else. An endless grassy plain sprawled before him, far as the eye could see, sheltered beneath a bright blue sky leading up to a lively green tree. Golden apples dangled from its fertile branches, enticing to the eye. He felt his mouth water at the sight of them. A woman stood before them, her back to him. "Hello, little one." He flinched and she laughed, a soft, musical sound that soothed his ragged nerves. "You needn't fear me." She turned to face him fully. "Please, come closer. I shan't bite, I promise." Warily, he did as she asked. And as he drew nearer he saw her. She was very strange for a lady. Almost translucent, really. Like some sort of green ghost. He could see right through her to the tree beyond. Yet for all that she was solid enough to hold one of those very apples in her hand. Likewise her eyes glowed a molten shade of gold as though lit from within by some harsh inner light. "Who are you?" "No one of importance." She pressed an apple to her lips and took a hearty bite from it. Doing seemed to make her more solid, real somehow. "Merely a stranger." His brow furrowed. "Then what do I call you?" "Names mean little here." She smiled then, a smile that reminded him so much of mother. It made his heart ache. "But you may call me Athena." He didn't know that name. It sounded nice. He gave his own without a second thought. "Atreus, tell me what ails you, young Atreus. What was the harm?" This was a dream, after all. Not like it could affect reality or anything. And besides, after all he'd been through, he was more than happy to have someone on his side, someone to rant to without fear of any harsh words or dismissal. And so he did. He told her everything. The green woman didn't question him. Not once. By the end, she had words for him. They were not what he expected. "If you fear being left behind, then stand up for yourself. No one else will." Easy for you to say. He kicked at the grass sullenly. "You're a ghost. You aren't real. You don't know what it's like to be weak." For some reason that seemed to amuse her, the green woman Athena smiled at him. "Do you seek power, then?" His heart skipped a beat. "What? Another time, then?" She looked past him, to something only she could see. "You have a friend in me, young Atreus." A gilded green hand laid itself on his forehead. "Sleep now." Remarkably, he did just, sleeping a dreamless slumber undaunted by nightmares. When he finally awoke some time later he felt rested. Into raised voices coming from within Freya's home. Father had left him to sleep on the grass outside, evidently to argue with his older brother. He probably hadn't meant anything by it, but it still stung for some reason. Drawing himself up, he edged toward a window, the voices growing louder with each step. Finally, he saw them. "What do you mean? No." Naruto pushed himself up on Freya's bed, face flushed, sweat slicking his forehead. His bandages were clean, but there could be no denying his cough. "I'm just fine. I can do this. Your fever has worsened overnight. You are not recovered." Father intoned, visage carved from stone. "You will rest here until we return." His brother absolutely hissed and batted his hand away. "I will not be left behind." Father's face darkened like a thundercloud. "You will do as I say, boy. Enough, the both of you." Freya pushed herself between them, distracting them, and Atreus saw his chance. He slipped inside when they weren't looking and made his way to Naruto's bedside. A part of him worried about his brother's health, the other was happy to finally be of use, to be chosen, to have father rely on him for once. To show that he could be someone. "Atreus," Naruto's voice snapped him out his reverie. "Talk some sense into him. Tell him I'm fine." Athena's words hummed in his ear. "Stand up for yourself. No one else will. Don't worry, we'll be fine without you." Naruto recoiled with a look of such pain that Atreus immediately regretted his poor choice of words. He'd hurt him. He knew he had. He hadn't meant to say it like that, only that they could handle the journey to Alfheim without him. He hastened to amend at the blonde's forlorn look. "I'll be sure and bring back a souvenir for you." But the damage was done. Naruto rolled over and presented his back to him. "Go, have your fun." Freya laid a hand on his shoulder. "Let us be off, then." Atreus perked up. "You're coming with us." She smiled softly. "Only for a little while. May I have a moment alone with him first?" Father grunted. "Only a moment." He paused and laid a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Even now he favored him. It wasn't fair. An ugly seed of jealousy was planted in Atreus' heart as father ushered him outside. He tried to shake the feeling off. It still took root. "Well, say your piece." Freya really tried, bless her. "They just want what's best for you." "Best?" Naruto couldn't control the hiss that fled from his lips, nor the pain that followed. "What's best?" His voice peaked in distress, triggering another coughing fit before he mastered himself once more. They wouldn't know what's best for themselves if it smacked them upside the head. Perhaps that wasn't kind of him, but anger burned through him all the same. Father's stubborn, and after that disaster, Atreus wants to prove himself. They're going to do something stupid. True. She laid a hand on his chest, forcing him back to the bed. "But trust that they'll make it past that. Trust in them." His face closed down, to which she took a hold of his chin and steered him back to her once more. "I know it isn't simple, but nothing is where family is concerned. I speak from experience." The bed creaked as she said beside him, "I'm a mother myself. At least I was." She looked away. "I haven't seen my son in a terribly long time." Naruto bit his lip until his tasted blood. "Don't say anything." Mustn't say a thing. If she knew he'd punched past his invulnerability. She read him like a book. "You've met him already, I believe." "Baldur." "I have. We fought." She didn't say any more on the subject. "He is the way he is, because of a mistake I made." "No kidding." The man was utterly mad, crazed and desperate to feel something, anything. After a lifetime of numbness, that would drive anyone insane. Have you thought to undo it? I cannot. Now it was Freya's turn to look away. He will come to harm and surely die. He could sense the fraught topic there, rife with danger, and wisely chose to skirt it. Is there a point to this? My point is this. She dared to lay a hand on his, gripped it now, to keep him from tugging it away. Don't let fear control you as it controls me. That's not a life worth living. He grunted and she sighed. You're going to be stubborn about this, aren't you? Very well. I'll be back shortly. No response, yet still she pressed on. After I lead your father and brother to Ulfheim, I'm going to range deeper into the wildwoods for some potent herbs. Hopefully they'll be enough to help break your fever. Will you be all right with Hildsvini and Mimir for a while? Naruto's temper flared anew in a rush of heat, turning his cheeks red. Did even she doubt him? It was too much. I'm not helpless. I'm not saying you are. Her words were soft. You're wounded and ill. You need rest, yes, but you'll recover. He tore his hand from hers with more force than he should have. Not soon enough. She touched his arm, sighed when he shied away, and stood. As you wish. For once, she took the hint. I'll leave you be. Naruto. Something in her voice made him look up. Freya had paused at the door and looked back, eyes full of sorrow. Have faith in your family. Don't lose them to fear the way I did mine. He didn't want to lose them. He wouldn't. He just wanted them to understand. I'll try. Her face lit up. That's all I ask. She left and silence reigned. It gnawed at him like a wolf with a bone. A minute passed. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He looked toward the table. Nothing to say. Mimir creaked, his good eye open. Didn't think it was my place to interject. No, of course not. For a talkative man he'd been unusually silent. He chose to see it as kindness. Do you think I'm weak, Mimir? Weak? The old sage chortled, head rocking a little where he'd been set. Not at all, brother. You're one of the few I've seen stand up to Thor and come away with their head intact. A bemused note threaded its way into his otherwise cheery disposition. You battered that bastard the same way he battered you. He'll think twice before tangling with you again. That drew a rueful smile to his face. But I couldn't beat him. Few haven't lived to tell the tale. Came the reply. Just rest, brother. Get your strength back. It'll all be right as rain by nightfall. He closed his eyes. A moment passed. Another. A minute now. No dice. I can't sleep. Suppose that's no surprise, given how riled up you were just now. Although he currently lacked the capacity to shrug, the old sage conveyed his mirth with a chuckle all the same. All right, let me tell you a story or two to pass the time, then. Any preferences? Naruto shrugged helplessly. Not really heard all that many. Tell me a good one. Aye, let's see. How about Surtur and his flaming sword? And so Mimir began his tales, one after the other. Gradually, a fog fell over Naruto's mind. Sleep came easily. A rift had begun to form between the boys. Kratos could sense it, feel it in the way his sons had looked at one another before their departure. Even now it hung over him like a pall. The words of Atreus had only served to further widen it. He was not blind to such strife, but he did not know how to bridge the gap between them. Atreus had chosen to walk ahead of him, and for once, he couldn't bring himself to call the boy back. He was hurting, burdened not only by Faye's death, but what he saw as his own weakness. Perhaps this time apart would allow their wounds, both physical and mental, to finally mend. Time healed. Most wounds. Not all, but most. Doesn't it? Grumbles. He nearly missed a step. Again he heard Faye's voice. What manner of madness was this? Had he truly lost his mind? Or was this some other power at work? Was he insane? Not yet. A foreign feeling fluttered in his old, cold heart. Did he dare to hope? Faye was mortal to the extent of his knowledge, but he had encountered specters of such before in the past. The same could be said of the dead here in Midgard. Sometimes ghosts were known to linger when they had tasks or regrets left unfulfilled. Did she have hers? He'd thought her at peace when she passed. Faye. Silence answered him. Kratos grunted and shook his head. Enough. Dwelling on such things would bring him no peace, only pain. Best to put it from his mind for now and focus on the task at hand. He looked to the girl, still silent by his side as she walked. This temple you speak of, it will take us to Ulfheim and the light we seek. It will. She nodded gravely, granting him a sidelong look. And I know you're worried about them. He glared down at her. Who? Your boys. Clever. Kratos grunted again. It did not dissuade the girl. You're trying, bless you. She dared a smile. That's what matters. They'll understand. HRMM. He was. Faye would have known what to say. He struggled with such gratitude and so let the girl speak instead. That said, I will not be able to join in Ulfheim you for long. Her words held a note of caution now. The curse placed upon me prevents it. I'll likely be torn from the realm and cast back here, to Midgard. Before that, and before we move the temple, here is what you must do. He listened intently to her words. Wise of her, to prepare them beforehand. And yet, the boy ... he will be well. Her eyes flashed with fire. I will not let him die. Naruto woke with a start. Burning. His entire body. Burning. He sucked in a ragged gasp and tried to sit up, only for his body to fail him. By the log, breathing hurt. Everything hurt. His wound ached. It felt as though a mountain were seated on his chest. Even the act of breathing threatened to bring on a fresh coughing spasm. Questions raged through his mind, each without an answer. Where was everyone? Where was Freya? Why was it so blasted quiet and dark? He pushed himself up with a start, squinted into the gloom now, only to realize the fire had dimmed. Mimir, a muffled grunt came from the table. MMRGL. He looked to where he'd last seen the smartest man alive and frowned. Someone had draped a cloth over his horned head. Gagged him too, by the sound of it. My apologies, a low voice intoned before he could think to free him. I didn't want to be seen ... or interrupted by the head. A man was standing before the hearth, tall of shoulder and broad of back, his head concealed by a dark hooded fur cowl. His voice was low, hoarse even, as though he hadn't spoken in quite some time. Naruto felt his hackles rise at the sound of it. He'd never heard it before in his life, yet he found himself on edge all the same. The stranger didn't turn to face him. Not yet. Their gaze remained fixed on the fading flame. Kratos, he said suddenly, apropos of nothing. You are his son. Naruto bit back a cough and lifted his chin. I am, came the answering grunt. Not of his blood, but if he took you in, blood does not matter. Here, the stranger turned fully, revealing an earthen cup cradled in well-worn hands. A pale blue mist wafted from within its confines. Here, a remedy from my homeland. He paused, correcting himself at the last instant. It will ease the pain. Naruto eyed the cup warily, the stranger's approach even more so, until said intruder sensed his trepidation and finally sighed. Your caution is unwarranted, boy. I did not fight my way through fire and death just to poison you. Drink. Reluctantly, he took the cup with aching hands and then lifted it to his lips. It tasted strangely sweet. The ache in his chest began to recede, bit by bit, and with it, his lungs began to clear. Finish it all at once, the stranger instructed. Spare not a single drop. He complied and guzzled it down. Almost immediately, the world began to blur. I'm sleepy again. A side effect. The man crouched down, bringing his face level with his to consider him for a moment. At length he spoke again. I've observed you for some time now. You wield my weapons well. His head felt like it was filled with cotton. Your weapons, the arms of Sparta. He glimpsed the ghost of a smile within the shadows of the hooded cowl. I once wielded them briefly ... I in another life. That didn't make any sense. Those weapons had belonged to Kratos, he corrected himself quickly. No one else had touched them. Who are you? It was getting harder to think. He could feel the medicine taking effect. HRMM, that grunt. It sounded just like his old man. I suppose there's no harm in telling you. You'll understand in due time. So saying, the stranger lifted his cowl. Naruto couldn't see him, not entirely in the low light, not with his vision dimming, but he glimpsed enough. A dark bearded visage stared back at him, marred by a vivid glowing scar etched into the left side of his face. It flowed down into a web of ugly marks from his neck into his lower torso, each pulsing with eerie life. He had never laid eye on this bearded brute, not once, yet for some reason he found himself reminded of Kratos. Why, he slurred the word, eyes drooping. Why do you look like? You know me. I'm a dead man. The very same who helped Freya carry you down that mountain after your battle with Thor. The stranger stood to leave, uncaring of his grasping hand. Sleep well, nephew. When we meet again, your training intensifies. He tugged the cloth off Mimir's head as he walked away. Naruto reached out a hand towards him. Wait, no use. Sleep claimed him once more. A stranger barred their path. Kratos didn't trust them for an instant. This odd, robed woman in white now stood before them, barring the way forward. Clearly elf, but not at all like the dark elf creatures they had encountered. He could only assume she was one of these light elves he'd heard tell of. Beyond that, he didn't know what to think of her. Worse, the girl was no longer here to advise them on such matters. She had been cast away some time ago, torn from this realm and cast back into her own. It was left to him to decide who or what this was, and moreover, what they wanted. Greetings, stalwart warriors. The light elf bowed her head. I am Alva. I wish to reclaim this temple. Might I ask for your aid? Nonsense and drivel. They hadn't the time for such a quest. Kratos grunted and walked past her. No. A hand touched his shoulder. I can make it worth your while, ghost of Sparta. How did she know? The Leviathan axe set itself to the woman's neck. Do not call me that. Atreus tilted his head. Ghost of what, now? Is nothing, boy. My apologies. The young woman raised her hands to show herself harmless. I have nothing but respect for your craft and did not mean to offend. You seek the light of Ulfheim. Beneath his watchful gaze she tugged back her veil, revealing a pale face, white eyes and hair the color of driven snow. As do I, our goal is the same. We would do well to work together. Perhaps sensing the refusal on his lips, she hastened on. I can speed your journey on, show you the hidden paths. Atreus looked his way, no doubt bright and hopeful at the prospect of having an ally in this wretched place. Well, if she wants to help us. Kratos scoffed at him as much as his soft-hearted naivete. They did not know what she truly wanted. You trust too easily, boy. The light elf offered them a winning smile. Rest assured, you've never had a friend like me. Oi, Sindri, look what I got. The sanitary smith looked up from his workbench. Fumbled now. Is that a piece of Mjolnir? Yup. Brock barked a laugh as he sauntered over. You gonna help me with this son of a bitch or not? Time's a-wasting. Naruto slept fitfully. He wasn't sure how much time passed, but it must have, because he woke to Freya and Brock arguing at his bedside, only to drift off again. He dreamed of Valkyries, of a song of ice and fire, of a hammer that both was and was not a hammer, of things that both should and should not be. And there, at the end of his dreams, he saw them. A man and a woman holding hands. One was fire, one was ice. Each were terribly tall, giants. He tried to call out to them. Neither heard him, neither looked his way, as though they weren't even aware of his existence. Beware. They faded without warning, the dream shifted, and he found himself gazing at a familiar face. Mask. I bring you a warning, noble warrior. Blue eyes snapped open. Ire. She tugged off her mask and his mind fizzled as he beheld the Valkyrie in her entirety. Beautiful. That was his first thought, the first thing he noticed about Ire. Her eyes were a deep piercing green, they almost seemed to glow in the low light, framed by hair so dark as to be cut from the night sky itself. And yet for all that she seemed weary. Beware. Her form flickered even as she spoke the word again, tendrils of darkness creeping up her body. Seek not the green woman. She is not to be trusted. Rise now. Awaken. You are needed. And then there was light. Naruto awoke to someone pinching his cheek. Rise and shine, whiskers. Blearily, he recognized the voice in the blue face peering down at him. Up with you, Brock. He coughed, grunted now as the dwarf pressed a glass of water into his hands. It cooled his dry throat enough for him to speak. How long have I? Dunno. The smith shrugged. You slept like the dead. Couple of days, I think. His eyes bulged and he all but burst to his feet. Days. Freya was there even as he stood, catching him with one hand. Easy, now. You've been out of it for a while. Naruto opened his mouth to refute her. Paused now. Wait. He could stand. Breathe, even. In place of the once crushing weakness and exhaustion that had plagued him, he felt only his usual brimming vitality. His lungs were full, his cough not but a bad memory. Freya caught his eye and smiled softly, all too pleased with herself. Doubtlessly she'd tended to him while he slept. Or maybe the sleeping had sped his recovery on. He didn't know. Thank you. She preened a little. You're welcome. It was rather touch and go there for a while. Stop making kissy faces, you two. Brock butted between them. We've got something to show you. Naruto quirked a brow, not at all comprehending. Show me now, then. Not here. Isanovich the Azure Vulgarian scoffed as though insulted by the very idea. You and yours'll be needing a place to rest your heads first, and I ain't talking about that new blabbermouth of yours. Nimir harumphed at his side, rolling his good eye. Rude little bugger, aren't you? Quiet, you. Me and Sindri got's a place ... and a gift for you. Naruto perked up at that. What kind of gift? Brock grinned. Your hammer's ready. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.